To all of you on this second day of the end conference of the Islanders at the Helm project. Today we're going to talk about climate challenges and also adaptation challenges and opportunities as well in the past, present and future. My name is Helm van Buren. I'm professor at Delft University of Technology. I've been engaged in this project since quite a long time already, when Francio approached me out of the blue actually, and he said, well, there is this interesting project that we're gonna propose, but we need some multidisciplinarity as well, and design thinking, architectural design thinking might be a good addition besides my artistic anthropological take on issues in the Dutch Caribbean. So it's, yeah, I engaged with you, Francio, and all the other people in this consortium on a very interesting and insightful journey. Learned really tremendously a lot. Also have been able to share some of these lessons also with colleagues in the Netherlands, which still very painfully are mostly unaware of the day-to-day issues experienced in the Dutch Caribbean, but also the strength and, well, resilience, ways of coping, ways of dealing that are present here, that we can also learn a lot from. Yeah, an architectural and engineering approach to climate adaptation is more, yesterday we had some discussions on how do you understand, interpret climate challenges as being here on the islands, residing here on the islands, and what it means, what it brings, what it, yeah, could, yeah, what it really means to you, this sort of full body sensation of the climate challenges, also with the very loaded past, of course, that created these challenges. There was also a question asked, well, how to get to a more action-oriented perspective? How can it lead to change? And I think today we will talk a bit more about imagining change and what kind of actions, interventions from an architectural point of view, but also fed by historical knowledge of past vegetation and what we can learn from the past, vegetation-wise, and the climate in the past. That is also feeding the discussion for today. Here, I just wanted to show you the picture. I'm not sure, Karel Weber, he used to be professor at TU Delft, an architect from Curaçao, lived on Curaçao also for a long time, was born here, and came back after his retirement and built this beautiful house. I'm not sure, I haven't visited yet, so I hope that perhaps I have the time this week to see it. But it's an inspirational example of how to build with past knowledge, with present knowledge, to prepare for the future in a sustainable, future-proof way. And below that house, the I Love Asphalt picture is also, well, eminent for some of the challenges that are still here, as in many built-up environments. Yeah, how to manage our human settlements and how to take care of them, how to make them more one with the environment we live in. And co-creative approaches are considered to be key. But then again, that sounds nice and easy, but as we also experienced within this project, it doesn't come by itself. And it's a difficult challenge and a difficult journey in which you really have to be willing to listen to each other and to engage with each other and to search for pathways. In the panel, we also have, we will have a panel discussion afterwards in which we also have people from the island who are engaging in the pathways. But first, we will have some speakers. Dr. Nelson Mota, colleague of mine, he will take you along in a journey of architectural ethnography. So it's also on present and past experiences from architecture and how to be knowing and how to take that future forward. Then we'll have Aga Koes, and I called it Housing Dreams, that you will discuss and present. And then we will have Kees, and I think, Kees, you will introduce us into some of Bonaire's vegetational memories, I called it. And you will have your own language to do so. And that also brings me to some of the discussions yesterday, that we have different ways of knowing. There are more formalized ways of knowing. There are really talking about data that you can store in your computer or have in other ways stored, but there are also embodied ways of knowing, different ways of knowing, like Betsy Gerigori's view yesterday on how people in Boca Sami, for example, know what the weather is like, when the weather does chuck, chuck, chuck. How to translate that in a meteo broadcast. So the different ways of knowing, that is also what I think we will be engaging in. Then we'll have a panel discussion with Casper Lengdering, a water engineering consultant. Corina Regale is already in the room from the Curaçao Pension Fund, investing in neighborhoods, in not only taking care of pensions, but also creating a livelihood with those pensions for people on the island. Timo Kelder, also present already. Oh, Casper is also ready, already there. Timo, working on the Climate Impact Atlas, amongst others from the island. Well, Patsy, you've all met already yesterday. She will be joining this afternoon. And Michael Newton, architect, also in the room here and working on heritage for a long time on the island. In the afternoon program, there will be a workshop on how to get under a policymaker's skin. Very intriguing. So I will be there at least, Simon. And it finishes just in time for us to run off to an excursion for those interested. To join us in the excursion, Casper and Michael will take us to Roikatochi. And we're going to see how they are restoring historic ways of water management and how they help us to prepare for today's and future challenges on the island. Very interesting to see, so I hope you can all join. There is a list at the registration desk. You can put up your name so we know who should be on the bus. And then we will be back here around 5:30, depending on the traffic. Then there will be also, for the people who stay here, a highly interesting workshop on regenerating Aruba schoolyards. I'm not sure if the ladies are already in the room, but that's also really worthwhile. And then the plenary wrap-up, Francio just informed me that that is not taking place, but of course we have a plenary drink probably, which also allows us to wrap up together in a more pleasant way. But without further ado, I would now like to switch to Nelson's presentation. Nelson, the floor is yours.
Okay, yes. But I will start while they fetch the mic for me. I will start by introducing myself. So thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's a different experience from those that I have usually I've been engaging with. I'm trained as an architect. I teach in the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environments. And what you will see today, this is not the first slide, so this is almost the last slide. Can you go back to the first slide, please? Otherwise, this will be very short. And so this, as the name already suggests, architectural ethnography tries to invite a transdisciplinary approach in terms of methods. But I decided to just stick with let's say, with the notion of a tool, not really a method, just try and downplay a little bit the expectations. In any case, I'm not used to give this presentation for an audience with so many anthropologists and archaeologists. So, I'm a little bit nervous about that, but let's see how it goes. Still, the slide is the next to last, so this is going to be just 2 minutes, I guess. Can you go to the first slide, please? Yeah, now it's giving away
Testing.
Yeah, I think it would. So the first one is one that has my name on it and the title of the presentation. There you go. This is it. Fantastic. This is a good time.
Because Hello? Yeah, it's working? Yeah. Because I don't use notes, I prefer to just do this a little bit more interactively. So as I just mentioned, so this is a research tool, and as you can also see in the subtitle, I also would like to invite other ways of including multi-sensory narratives. And I see that in an audience where people are also interested in music, in artistic forms, I think that could be really interesting to talk about. Now, the thing is, what is this thing called architectural ethnography? What is it? And why does it matter? Well, so the two key questions that at least came to my mind when we started engaging with this. So this is still a debate going on because this notion of architectural ethnography is relatively recent, that's less than 10 years. And it has been coined by Momoyo Kajima, a partner of a Japanese architectural office based in Tokyo, and in the Venice Biennale of 2018. But then our colleagues from anthropology prefer to call it architectural anthropology. The thing is that, what one thing is and the other it is not, it's also a little bit complicated to explain. But Tim Ingold tried to synthesize by saying that architectural anthropology is not the same as anthropology of architecture, nor is it ethnography for architects. All of these things actually mean different things, right? And Tim Ingold doesn't like the term architectural ethnography, but I will still stick to it, and I will explain why. So then I tried to explain what this is by what it is not. So, or at least not only. So this is not only, let's say, the participant observation like Malinowski, a Polish guy, white guy in the middle of Borneo with an exotic community and so on and so forth. So that's not really what architectural ethnography is, or at least it's not only that. So it goes beyond participant observation. But it's also not what Andrei Kozy, an anthropologist that is very skillful in drawing, that came up with this book, Drawn to See. So he uses drawings as an ethnographic method, and he uses it in a very effective way. And so I think architectural ethnography is indeed using drawings as an ethnographic method, but it's also more than that. And I'm going to tell a little bit about that. And but it's also not, this is probably, you don't know this, but this is a work which is now very, very, well known. But this is a colleague, which is an architect and anthropologist, Alvena Yaneva, that spent 6 months in one of the top architectural offices in the world, which is OMA, which is actually based in the city where I live, in Rotterdam. And then she did an ethnography of how things work in that office, how the boss comes, how the poor collaborators are exploited, how it destroys the models, and so on and so forth. This is also not what this is about. So it transcends ethnography of design. Now, what is it? So this is an image. So this architectural ethnography, this was actually triggered by Momoyo Kajima's experience of the earthquake and tsunami in Japan in 2011, right? And this is what it looked like. Now, of course, I didn't include, just to save you from that, but the parallels with the aftermath of Irma, are relatively easy to establish. And why did she come up with this notion of architectural ethnography? It's because she, when visiting these places, she just realized that the physical presence had literally vanished, destroyed. And she realized that she had a fantastic instrument, which is drawing, that could, engaging in conversations, in interviews with the community, rebuild those memories and use them to project the reconstruction or the critical reconstruction of the communities that were vanished and wiped out. So she mentions that this is this is what creates a certain illumination of how drawings can be used to reconstitute those spaces, and that's when she came to this kind of notion of architectural ethnography. And then what I also like very much is that while engaging in this reconstruction plan, she also realized that the drawings could indeed illustrate and realize this sequence between past, present, and future. So I also like talking about the temporalities that engaging with architectural ethnography enables. But I also like, of course, I had to have a quote by Glissant, like everyone has, so I didn't want to feel diminished. And of course, Glissant also talks about this notion of he talks about the full sense of identity and also, going away from this anachronistic and lethal notion of roots. And I like this. I mean, he uses this notion of full sense, but I prefer the multisensory account of realities. And you will see how this comes in the work. And I'm new to the to the Caribbean, but I spent a fantastic few days in St. Maarten. And in one of those days, I was sitting in this place. For those who know, it's Candida's place. And I was really intrigued, with all the fancy collection of chairs, but also little things, So I like photos, and I think photos are quite nice. And there's a stream of ethnographic work based on so-called visual ethnography, which deals a great deal with photography. I think photography is okay, but what I like about drawing is that drawing allows you to detach and then reconnect and unpack. So, for example, I did a simple exercise over the last couple of days. What if we get rid of that picture and just make a drawing of it? And then through that drawing, we can actually unpack this conversation we had with Candida under beach grape trees outside Philipsburg. And then you can actually start looking into things in a different way. You can actually touch and feel things. So how the pavement that she paved, because with the rains it became slippery, and their clients, because this is also an income-generating space, that space became slippery, and she said, well, this is not good for my clientele. So she herself poured cement on the floor and just recycled a carpet to put there next to the chairs. So you can feel it. But also you can hear the horns of the cars honking on Arch Road, which is just nearby. You feel that you are under this canopy of trees, but actually you are just next to a busy road. Then you also smell the fragrance of the beach grape trees. And you then also sort of look, and you discover that the place where we are actually is a destroyed house. You can see that because there is still some broken tiles of a sink there that remain. You can see with your eyes because you identify the tiles. And then you, of course, she brings this little cool box with a nice cold bottle of Presidente. So you can also taste the benefits of being there with Candida. So, and then you go with her stories. She's from the Dominican Republic, so she also tells the stories of visiting her place and the children that she has there. So it's a lot of things that you can unpack, but you also need to be critical. You have to, from that complex reality, you have to extract things. So for me, this all comes together in this definition of expression ethnography as the drawing-based multisensory narratives of social and special practices. Anyway, you don't need to, but why does it matter? Because in my mind, it promotes a more human-centered design approach. Maybe for you this comes natural, but in architecture, there's, the predominant analytical methods are very much, let's say, based on products, not on processes. So this is, for us, a new way of engaging with analytical work and bringing, let's say, the humans. I know there is not only the humans, it's more than humans and non-humans, but this particular component is definitely different. But also reveals some hidden social and spatial dynamics, expands the role of drawings, not only just to represent something like, in a real estate advertisement, but actually to, let's say, to unpack complex things. And then it also challenges this traditional design thinking that architects just, create a nice project just to give you a nice house. And you just think about the house. And people don't think about the process of living in those houses. And when you engage in this kind of research, you can actually think a little bit more about that. But it also has a lot of challenges. The first one is ethical. Now, if I would be God, and I will ask, so you are going to lose one of your 5 senses. So who wants to lose touch? Raise your hand. Who wants to lose taste? Raise your hand.
That's the option of all of them?
Yeah, I will just take away 1 sense from you. Which one would you choose? Now the thing, sound, Now the thing is, when I ask, if I'm God and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to take away one of your 5 senses, I wonder how many of you would say sight. Anyone? You will be okay with losing sight? You too? Yeah? No, that's interesting. Every time that I do this, there's always something that comes about. The most cherished sense is sight. And now, the problem with this is that, well, it's not necessarily a problem, it's something that we need to be aware of, is that this also has developed this notion of ocular centrism, so the centrality of the visual. And the thing is that maybe you don't notice, but how many times do you say something that, see what I mean? No, you didn't realize, but I just said, see what I mean. Why the hell should you see what I mean? Yeah? Or do you, what is your point of view? Why should I say your point of view? All of these things are in our minds, and we don't even realize how much we are, our discourse is based on ocular centrism. And the thing is that, as Donna Haraway puts it, is that ocular centrism, or what she calls the social power relations of everyday visuality, these have actually been used a great deal by militarism, capitalism, colonialism, and male supremacy, right? Because it's a way of trying to frame things in a format that seems to be objective and seems to be, let's say, undisputed. And of course, distance the knowing subject, as she calls it, from everybody and everything, in the interests of unfettered power. Now, the methodological challenge is that this tries to establish a conversation between two different disciplines. And what accessory ethnography allows is that you can participate in this, well, say, for example, in field work, in different ways, in terms of using it to visualize, but also to embody the knowledge, but also then translate the knowledge. And that is also powerful, a powerful tool in that respect. But also calls for different ways of seeing. You know, it's not what the images are, but what it is seen, but also how what kind of ways of seeing they invite. And the other thing is that this also allows us to move from the cultural to the material. For example, I mean, the temperature in this room, the color of this wall, you know, the fabric of these seats, all of this matters for how you feel, how you perceive your experience in this particular moment. It's the same thing in your house. It's the same thing in every lived space. And this allows us to go from there. It's not only just inquires into the material, cultural, into the cultural, social, and all that, but also the material. That is part of the scene. That specific materiality, you know, promotes or restricts movements, as my colleague says there. So, it also goes beyond the end user. This suggests that there is a projective dimension to it. And this finally brings something that I like very much, which is a tool that navigates between science and aesthetics. So it's not only collecting a solid data and just processing it in some way. This is also the way that you do it. How do you engage? What kind of language do you develop? How does that actually communicate? And there's an aesthetical quality to it. It's not neutral. The way that you organize a slide is not neutral. The color that I use for my slides are not neutral. The font size and the font type are not neutral. There is an aesthetic option that I put there, and I like it like that. If you don't like it, it's fine, but there is some sort of project there, right? Now, the thing is that in education, this is also extremely important, especially in architectural education, because it gives the students a sense of place and the ability to encounter difference and be aware of this social dimension of art and architecture. The other key thing is about these temporalities, and the temporalities of field work. So this is, there is an analytical component that probably puts a great deal of importance in the present, obviously, or everything stems from the present, but maybe tries to make sense of the past. I assume, but I'm not sure, this will be something for our discussion, that this is what ethnographers and anthropologists are more, archaeologists probably interested in. For architects, it's a little bit different because we have a more projective approach, right? So we look into the present. Of course, we try to understand the past, but our goal is really to produce projective imaginations. So it's trying to move from activating memory to projecting imaginations. And of course, in the typical phasing of field work, from collecting to processing and disseminating data, these drawings and these particular ways of engaging with subjects, with spaces, with places, we have different ways of approaching that. So how to interview a home, how to interview a place. And I think it's also important to understand that now we cannot engage in 2 years of ethnographic campaign as in classic ethnography. I mean, we are very lucky if we can engage in 10 weeks of research, 1 month or even 2 weeks. But these short-term ethnographic research are not necessarily useless. They can be quite relevant still. Of course, there's different techniques, different ways. I'm not going to go through this, but just gonna illustrate a little bit what so in our educational program, we engage with contexts that are experiencing a process of rapid urbanization. So this is in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. We have also worked in Mumbai, in São Paulo, in Rio de Janeiro, in Dhaka. And in all this, we always have we face certain challenges to understand, let's say, the aspirations of the people who live there, but also in terms of language and communication. And interviews, but also sitting with, let's say, with volunteers, with members of the community is absolutely essential. Not just to record what they say, but also to smell how the houses, to check which elements of the decoration they praise, the pictures that they have in their mental piece, and so on and so forth. So this is part and parcel of this multisensory experience. But also we conduct this touring of the home. So we record sounds in specific places of the house. And this is the work we did with the community of older adults in The Hague, and trying to go through them what an ordinary day in their life looks like. And they take us through, and then we register all the sounds and the different accounts of how they experience their home in the different spaces. And then we can process this in this timeline. So we can create a timeline where we use a prompt, 1 day in the life of. So, and then we try, and we are very interested in knowing what an ordinary day looks like. We don't care about extraordinary days because they probably represent 0.05% of your life, right? But what represents 99.9% of your life is ordinary routine days. So we want to know more about those. And then we can create a cartography of that using different scales and different ways of representing how they move inside the house, how they move inside the neighborhood, how they move inside the building, how they interact with their neighbors and surrounding context. But also different ways of engaging. I think this was, you were part of this? No, someone else. We also find other ways of conducting this collection of data through participatory activities. For example, try to, instead of organizing an interview, people are just fed up with interviews. It's, always the same interview. I'm sick and tired of that. But when we organize a game and we engage them in a kind of a more, let's say, ludic, so it sort of, you cannot overlook how important and how great this collection of information is. And then we also use this fantastic tool, which are video reenactments. So we give a little camera to in this case, it's a senior citizen also living in a part of The Hague. And he recorded alone in his apartment, and then recorded what objects and which spaces are meaningful for him, and what role they play in his everyday life. And he records all this, and then our students are not there. Nobody's there. Only he was there with his little camera performing this. And then, of course, with his authorization, we process that information into an analytical outcome. But also trying to record sound. So this is a work that some students did in the Chinese community living in The Hague. So they went, instead of going to their places, they went to the supermarket where they do their shopping. And they trace all the movements that the different people do. And they also try to make sense of how people engage with that space in different temporalities. Some people just go there, they do their thing, and they go. Some others go there to hang out, to engaging in a conversation with the other neighbors. And you see the colors, the display in the shelves, the movements and all that. And they record the sounds in all different spaces and see how busy it is on the street, how busy it is in some shelf sectors, and so on and so forth. Now, how do you process this? So we have engaged in a difficult but interesting let's say, challenge of trying to synthesize what we would call patterns of inhabitation. So in this work, our students conducted in Mumbai, they went to settlements where they tried to understand how the house is activated throughout the day. So how a small house, this is a house in a so-called informal settlement, but even though it's a small house, but the house keeps on changing throughout the day. So if you actually observe and conduct these observations only in the course of a day, you can see how the different spaces are activated and what is happening there. And they can also translate this using these drawings in with what we call, let's say, this book of patterns, where there is just the ultimate synthesis, which is the title, a meaningful image, and an extended caption. And this is a challenge because of how can you make sense of a complex reality by reducing it to a set of patterns. Obviously, you are always going to get it wrong, but this also has enabled an understanding of these spaces in ways that otherwise would be a little bit complicated to unpack. During the COVID, we could not travel with our researchers and students, and one of our students decided that she still wanted to develop a project in Oman addressing the community of so-called guest workers. And then she could not go there, and then she developed something that now is called ethnography. This is ethnography based on social media and other kind of access. So she entered the social media of Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and Indian workers, and she also, through WhatsApp, she started having a conversation with them. And all the information that, let's say, this exchange that she collected allowed her also to produce this so-called book of patterns based on 4 categories: domestic practices, social spaces, religious rituals, and mobility. Now, this is then using her tool, let's say drawing, she could process, they live like this. So they live in sort of containers in Oman, building the big stadia for the wealthy. And they live like this, but then what you see here, for example, these are the patterns of inhabitation related with religious rituals. She could process how the Muslims and the Hindus would live together. And all this is based, even though she could not be there, all of this was based in evidence that she collected through the social media, being part of that, medium. And then we developed this notion of a graphic anatomies. Basically, as the medical term suggests, is how could you just, really go beyond the surface and try to unfold different aspects of dwelling or spaces. So this is the work of a student where we asked them to produce an auto-ethnography. So look at yourself and build up your own sort of bio through the places that you call home. So this is a student that was born in Afghanistan, and then she had to flee. She had to leave Afghanistan because of the Taliban, and she came to live in the Netherlands. And then she built a beautiful drawing that was as tall as she is. And in this, from 1997, she showed all the places that she lived, always highlighting the place that she called home. And with this, we go through a caravan, we go through a refugee camp, all the way from the nice house where she was born and to the social housing dwelling unit that she was living while she was a student there. So this anatomy allows you also to see through. So it's not reality, it's not necessarily objective. And this brings me to another aspect that we call it's called fictocriticism. The possibility of introducing fiction in analytical work. So what you, interviews that you conduct, material that you collect, don't necessarily have to be reproduced in a very objective and, let's call it, scientific way. You can also introduce fiction. So our students produce graphic novels as ways of synthesizing their, the data that they collected. This is, for example, a graphic novel that was produced by one of our students in Addis Ababa, where he retraces the stories that were told to him by the participants, but he uses, if you can recognize, floor plans and views, which are typical architectural elements, but embedded in a graphic novel. And this also brings, let's say, this possibility of using drawing also in other forms, other outputs, for example, games. So the students, after conducting 10 weeks of research with a community of elderly citizens in The Hague, they realized that they have challenges. For example, if you are on a wheelchair, it's difficult to navigate curbs and stuff like that. And they collecting all their experiences. They built a game where they simulate what the challenges. When you have a challenge, you have to go back. If you have something that enables you to go forward, like in a game, you go faster through the game boards to your goal. But then also with animation. So this is an animation that sees this community of elderly people in The Hague through the perspective of an elevator. They say, well, I'm not so much interested in looking into the room of one of the people living there, but I'm interested in using the perspective of an elevator. What happens in one day in the life of an elevator? Because this is a multi-story building, and they want to know how, because all of them need to go through it. And using this drawing, using this medium, they can highlight how these dynamics of relation between people and other people, but also people and spaces, are negotiated through the elevator. Then, of course, just to wrap up, it's also important that you bring this back, because these drawings and this kind of outputs are very powerful, because people know how to, it's easy to establish a communication with this, right? I guess all of you would agree that what we've seen is not, science fiction or very complicated concepts and all that. It's just, ways of synthesizing complex realities using a medium which is relatively easy to unpack. And when they bring this, let's say, they also get feedback. So it's also easier for the community to say, well, no, I think I'm misrepresented there, because the way that you selected the parts that are supposed to show or illustrate my everyday life, they are not really right, So this is not what I said. So they are able to give back and to interact in this conversation in a very meaningful way. And then trying to bring this also as a kind of a formal exhibition to the places where they live, but also to what symbolizes the heart of, this is the headquarters, the city hall of The Hague, where more than 30,000 people pass by every day, and we bring, the results of this work to be shown there, and where we also show the results of these videos that the residents recorded themselves, and they could see how this comes back, and then how their work is also acknowledged as part of, they are indeed active parts of the research. Now, I just want to wrap up with emphasizing 3 key components in architectural ethnography. One is that it goes beyond the familiar. So the idea is that with this, it also enables a certain dive into aspects that maybe you are not familiar with. And this facilitates, let's say, some sort of making sense of what somebody will call the other or the stranger. And these graphic anthropologists can stimulate students to use these drawings and acknowledge the cultural differences and developing these projective imaginations. But also, it goes beyond objectivity. You are not just framed by this, the numbers and statistics and whatnot. You can also, acknowledge this complex entanglement of voices and temporalities and viewpoints using drawings as a medium. And finally, it goes beyond the visible, like Candida's Place. It's not just what you see. It goes way beyond what you see. It goes way beyond the invisible. It actually unravels multiple layers that are often, let's say, overlooked by other ways of presenting things. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nelson. Well, lots of food for thought. High speed that you took us through it. Welcome to the world of architecture. Well, undoubtedly there are some questions. We have time for some questions now. Not too many, but what kind of questions did it bring to you?
I just want to compliment you. This is very good. Very good. I needed that. I just want to compliment you. Very good. You were nervous, but there was no reason to be nervous. Perfect.
Well, thank you for this compliment. I think that was yours.
Thanks, Nelson. I'm wondering how so once you do this ethnography, how do you take it back to sort of the design processes that are in your discipline, basically?
Thanks so much. It's a great question.
And so usually this moves into projective mode in the case of the design studio. But sometimes it's just a way of wrapping up this, let's say, fieldwork campaign. For example, what we do with the communities of elderly in The Hague. It doesn't follow necessarily as a project, but as a way of bringing their, their narratives in these different formats. And usually, students also use drawings for their projective imaginations, not only in an analytical, but also in the design phase. So it becomes also kind of a continuous conversation.
Two short questions.
Really short, you touched on it, but I'm really curious about when there is significant impact that changes their habitual daily patterns. After the impact, do they go back to those patterns, or is the impact part of the evolution of changing patterns?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jay. Also a great question in the sense that, yeah, it's problematic even to use this notion of patterns of inhabitation because they may suggest that there's indeed patterns, that you have a pattern of everyday life, and this is going to remain like that forever, and you, and you, and you. And then we can just, put it all in a blender, and we come up with a project that caters for your patterns, and we are good. So what we also try to always discuss is this notion of the temporalities and also aspirational models. That even though people may, let's say, or you may observe certain patterns, but that doesn't mean that they want to necessarily remain frozen in time, and that there is, also they themselves have an imagination or an aspiration to move from that particular pattern into something else. But that's not what we want to, so the only thing that we try to make sense of is that not to be driven by these projective imaginations of exceptional features of your future life, but also a projective imagination of your everyday life. So it can and should and will change, but always keeping a focus on this notion of, let's say, let's say the routine, the everyday life, and not the exceptional moment, let's say.
A final brief question?
I'm trying to figure out what happens outside of oculocentrism. Yeah,
Ocular centrism.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about those who do not see, and those who do not give so much importance to the visual.
Yeah.
It wasn't a direct question.
What? Yeah. Well,
Brief comment.
Antonio. No. So the thing is that, at least in architectural studies, ocular centrism is so prominent that what we try to, let's say, bring to the fore with this particular tool is to try and suggest that, while what you see is important, but you should pay more attention to what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you feel. And the thing is, of course, we cannot bring what you felt in Addis Ababa back to, or in St. Maarten or in Curaçao, back to a classroom in Delft in a direct way. Or maybe we can bring some fragments or whatever. But what's important is that is processed in your account of the, say, realities that you have been exposed to. So in that sense, well, if someone cannot see, probably as I guess everybody knows, they develop the other senses in a more acute way. And we sort of try to do, or to try to, suggest that. We basically close the eyes of the students for a while and say, now, forget what you see and try to bring together what you hear, what you feel, what you smell, what you taste.
Thank you so much, Nelson. Well, thank you. And lots of food for thought, I think, also for during the coffee break and lunch. But first, we continue with the, projective imagination of living, of the home. Aga Kus, doctoral researcher at TU Delft and KITOV, also part of this project. The floor is yours. Do you want this mic or that mic?
I think I'm going to be good. If this works, then it should be fine.
Here's the clicker.
Okay, thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Nelson, for such a wonderful beginning of the conversation about the topic of housing. Today, during my presentations, we are going to indeed focus on dream housing and the housing inspirations, as well as cultural references and how they intertwine between the symbolism as well as affordability and resilience. And we are going to focus on three particular archetypes of housing, namely the chattel house, the glass house, and la casita. So in the Caribbean, there is a very large issues of affordable houses, right? We focus specifically on the affordable housing on San Martin, whereas we also see that other islands have similar issues of providing houses that are affordable for the residents of the island. This disconnection results in leaving many people outside of the housing system and leading them to construct their own houses, right, through the self-organized processes. Those houses are particularly affected by the climate change conditions, and they are often the most vulnerable. So they overheat very easily, they are affected by tropical storms, by flooding, and it directly impacts the people who live in them, causing more effort on them to be able to maintain and repair the houses, as well as more money and time that is required to do such processes. Those houses are built through the incremental step-by-step process. They are modified, they are adapted, they grow gradually over the time, and they adapt to the needs and the changing circumstances. In our research, we call this gradual adaptation housing flows. And with this, we underline this evolutionary and gradual nature of the housing development. Considering the intensification of the climate change, as well as the increasing impact that they have on the low-income housing, there is an urgent need to facilitate the design processes and the modifications and adaptations to achieve affordable and resilient houses. This can be supported through a design decision-making process based on the collaboration between the designers, the building professionals, and the residents themselves. And to achieve this facilitation of adaptations and repair, we propose a design framework called Designing for Flow. We implemented this framework through a set of methods, tools, and principles that we suggested and developed alongside the proposed approach, with one of them including so-called Designing for a Flow house. They focus on helping, so assisting the process of co-designing, so collaboratively coming together and proposing a new possible housing solutions. This set of cards is organized in the way that actually serves as a rehearsal to designing an actual house. So it follows a step-by-step process, starting with the aspects related to the selection of the sites, gradually moving from the foundation, walls, roofs, as if you were preparing to build your actual house. For each of the stages, it offers different options based on material or design components. And for this, we communicate with the participants that participate in the design sessions, showing them different options that are possible, as well as discussing the implications that a certain design decision has, right? And by the implications, we mean what it means in terms of costs of the material, but also what that cost implies over the years of the use of the house, the aspects of comfort and climate. We use this tool in Curaçao, in Bonaire and San Martin to collectively propose, together with the residents, building professionals, also the students of the University of San Martin, to try to come together and think how the possible housing solutions could look like in the future. And for this, we use the cards to support the decision-making. However, during this process, we noticed that not all of the decisions are being based on the aspects of comfort, climate, or cost, right? There is also stuff that are meaningful and very individual to all of us. And that includes, for instance, housing aspirations, which relate to a certain characteristics, elements, features of a house that each of us has in the back of their house as a house that they would like to live in. It's a dream house. And this is a very symbolic yet individual aspect that relates to identity, that relates to the background, culture, societal and economic aspects. So during our sessions, during the co-design sessions, we also ask the participants to somehow connect the house that was developed through the tools with their housing aspirations. And although this tool does have some limitations because it's made by the drawings of the residents who are not really a skilled architects, so there is this interesting drawing component to it, what we noticed that they also have some symbolic elements that pop out and that reflect the important aspects that we might not think about in the housing design for the cards, but yet they are very, very relevant for particular people. And by this, I mean, for instance, including the outdoor spaces, such as porches, such as hammocks, seating spaces that were expressed through the drawing, the connection to nature by drawing mango trees and the importance of the vegetation and the food security that there is on the island, as well as, surprisingly, for the proposal of the low-income housing project, I think 3 of the 10 groups that we worked with proposed swimming pools. So, well, that also, we could also read it as the relationship to climate, you know, so not the actual act of having a swimming pool, but thinking about the comfort of a house. All right, so building of this experience and saying that there is so many elements that are related to the aspirations of the housing design, we focused on looking into a larger extent to 3 types of houses, so-called 3 housing archetypes, namely the chattel, the glass house, and la casita. Because based off analysis of these houses, we can also see the particular elements that people reflect in their drawing and then to some extent aspire to reinforce in their housing designs. And we did that by looking at the architectural references, of course, but also through the literature and music and connection to overall cultural references that surround us and has a direct impact on what kind of houses we dream about. So the first one is a chattel house, which is a traditional wooden house. This type of houses came very strongly throughout our research, especially amongst older residents that convey a sort of longing, a sort of nostalgia to how the houses were like in the future, almost romanticizing the maintenance, but also the comfort qualities that such houses has. So this type of houses, it's a traditional wooden house that is through literature connotated to Barbados. However, it's present in majority of the islands. It's built on a podium, on a concrete podium, which protects it from flows of water and the floods, and ensures stability. And of course, since they were developed during colonial period, that also reflects on the system that was used for the construction, right? So they were built as mobile elements to be deconstructed and constructed together due to the land uncertainty. The houses were small, often consisting of 1 or 2 rooms with a bathroom. However, they were very often expanding by doubling the same structure or adding additional rooms, often also with different materials in front, in the back, on the side. The chattel houses has a very complex reading and a very complex connotations. It emerges as a house that was built for enslaved people on plantations, and also stands in a strong contrast between the house that the enslaved people lived in and enslavers were living in. On the other side, it also represents, over the years, it started to be connected to the symbol of freedom and independence that the first free people would get, because it was the first type of houses that they could get for themselves. And that is also represented and very strongly connected with this idea of pursuit for a house of one's own, such as in the house for Mr. Biswas, where Naipaul, although controversial author, I'm not going to get into that, shows very well the importance of looking for a place that you can call your home, even if it's a small wooden house. This kind of feeling of longing and nostalgia is also present in music, for instance, such as the Mighty Gabi Emerton, when the author who's singing passes through the Emerton, leaving the city and expressing this longing for the past and the coming changes that are happening to the city. Okay. All right. Closing up the part of the symbolism. The houses indeed performed relatively well in the Caribbean climate, right? So wood was better adapted to the extreme heat and the heat waves in comparison to concrete, because it does not retain the heat as concrete does, and it allowed for a good ventilation. They also often included climate comfort elements, such as the wooden shutter, such as the adequate slope of the roof that allow for the easy flow of the rain, as well as the elevation from the ground to prevent from flooding or devastation. Yet, they also, to some extent, I'm sorry, I'm not Gregory, I'm not going to be able to sing for you today. However, also in the musical clips, the houses are portrayed as so-called dry house weather, right? So the houses that perform very well in the dry weather, in the heat, but are not prepared for the climate changes and hurricanes and storms. All right, the second type of house is a glass house. And this type of houses we include, and it might surprise you, however, it came also from the experience from the workshop, during which one of the participants came to me after the first session that we held, asking if I could assist him in designing a glass house. Well, that was a workshop on affordable housing design. So I tried to have a good conversation with him. He thanked me very much and made sure to not come back for the second day of our workshop. Well, nonetheless, it was important for us to include the glass also, as it has strong symbolism and representations in a different context. And it's one of the archetypes of houses that we see very often here in the Caribbean, connected with transparency, visibility, and also to the connection of the surrounding landscapes. This particular one, types of house, it was based on the modern movement in architecture, when the architects started to gradually experiment with new materials and new technologies, using more concrete and steel frames, which left the opportunity to implement also these large glass panels that over the years have become a symbol of status. The glass houses also stands in the strong opposition with the opaque, strong walls that are often surrounding the city, especially colonial cities, and that offer security and protection, as well as distancing of oneself and putting up the walls between the nature and between human beings. One of the first houses in the Caribbean, or first building in the Caribbean, that was aimed to be developed using this new technology of building with large glass panels was an administrative building of Bacardi, based on the collaboration of Ms. Van der Rohe with the Bacardi administration, aimed to be developed in Santiago de Cuba. Unfortunately, this building was never developed due to the change of the political situation. And even more interestingly, Mies brought the project back to Europe and developed a museum in Berlin, which looks very much like the project that we saw for Santiago. The glass houses also have a strong connection to the Caribbean literature, in a way to connecting it to the botanical gardens, such as the book of Jamaica Kincaid in My Garden. It brings the concept of glass house in a different way, not in terms of transparency, but rather in a way how colonial dynamics in connection to transport and display of foreign and often invasive plants were organized. And in this case, it connects more to the imposition and transportation, classification, and display of foreign elements, symbolizing who and what was left outside those glass, even though they were visible and transparent. And we still have botanical gardens in St. Nevis, surprisingly. Yeah. Well, the other aspect of glass in architecture is that is also very sharp when it's broken. So it stands again in the opposite of the transparency and the visibility and the pleasantness that one might expect. So people do use it also in St. Maarten very often for protection of their own properties as fences. And it's also very much connected to buildings that are not adapted to the climate, right? So the houses get very often overheated, they heavily rely on their air conditioning. The glass itself is very expensive because it needs to be not only reinforced, but also tinted to reflect the solar radiation. And it causes a very big harm to the neighbors in case if it's broken during a hurricane. Over the years, people also adopted the presence of the glass houses as the status of symbol and luxury. From one side, displaying what they have and the wealth that they have, but also on the other side, using it to display their lifestyle from inside. So it works as a kind of large aquarium that demonstrates people's life. They are also highly abusive to the environment, as they require excavations and adaptations and have high costs, environmental costs of development. On the other side, although the glass house are often subject to the debate, the proverb echoed in the song by Trinidadian author Peter Tosh. A Jamaican. Oh, sorry for the mistake. Hey, how good to have a community immediately improving. That was a test, you know, if you are still listening. Right. So he said, if you live in a glass house, don't throw stones. And that speaks also about the complexity of judgment, that each of us uses the glass elements to some extent. And it also puts us in a fragile position as those casting the judgment, as well as showing the contradictions inherent in the act of judgment itself. And lastly, we have La Casita, which got a lot of traction recently, especially through the Bad Bunny's. Okay, I go very fast. Through the Bad Bunny's concert. Well, those houses follow the course of industrialization in Puerto Rico, where the traditional wooden houses that were built with a specific layout and almost a catalog-like setting, where you could choose what kind of houses you're gonna opt for, were adapted with the concrete prefabricated structure, which allowed for an easy assembly, as well as providing additional climate aspects, such as improving their privacy, as well as soundproofing of the walls. Okay. Well, okay, let me go back for a second to this one. Well, such types of housing were also often based with metal windows and those with louver. In various variation over the time, they also turn into thick and flat concrete roof that allowed also for the possibility of expansion or using it as a storage. And the wild development of these houses also came across during the concerts and the residency of Bad Bunny, which also related it as a cultural symbol of pride, belonging, identity, and reconnection with cultural roots, with many people expressing that being at the concert themselves felt like returning to their house and participating in the Christmas party at their grandma's house, which also shows us once again how representation of different houses and the meaning that is embedded with them is connected to the human experience. And interestingly enough, it also influenced a lot the culture and the development of the houses that are happening right now. So people indeed adapt their houses to imitate the same kind of colors and situation, as well as even the real estate and listings include nowadays more houses similar to those of Bad Bunny rather than turning back of the luxurious villas. Yet those houses are also not perfect for climate. They perform much better in terms of the hurricanes. However, they are very, very dangerous for earthquakes. The concrete cracks very, very easily, and we already saw based on the Haiti 2010 experience, how dangerous is to have all of the houses standing close by and being constructed with concrete. And it also has the challenges of retaining the heat. So there is always some pros and cons. So wrapping up, people make decisions regarding the housing design by balancing individually important priorities, right? So we have safety, we have comfort, and we have beauty. But the cultural references, including housing archetypes, play an important role in decision-making process. They shape housing aspirations and desires, which in turn are deeply connected to individual and collective identity, cultural pride, representation, sense of belonging. Housing and housing desires are not disconnected from the culture, not the context. They are rather embedded with them. Their symbolism and meaning change over time, and they are often interpreted in a various way depending on the individual. Discussing those aspects and their meanings through co-creative sessions, through dialogues, and through reflections on housing aspirations and housing archetypes is crucial for collectively addressing housing aspirations and for developing contextually grounded and meaningful housing designs. To wrap up, some years ago during my first year evaluation meeting, Francio asked me about the difference between a house and a home, which at that time was a very interesting question. And I came to think of a house as a structure made of materials and a home as a place shaped by relationships, by care, by the people whose presence gives meanings to the walls around them. So a house may offer a shelter, but the home offers belonging. The homes I studied during those 4 years of the research grew gradually. They were often built with diverse materials and shaped by varied and frequently challenging circumstances. And even the sturdiest structures, no matter if they are glass, if they are wood, or they are concrete, can be vulnerable to extreme climate events and at times may fall apart. Yet through care and collective effort, they are repaired, adapted, and given a new life, transforming houses into homes. And in many ways, the Islanders at the Helm projects mirrors the same process. It too has been constructed piece by piece through the gradual development of the colleagues who contributed to the project. It was shared by diverse minds and disciplines and tested by many challenging, also including those who personally affected me. Yet despite these difficulties, I remain grateful for the opportunity to learn and contribute to this evolving structure of the project.
Thank you so much, Aga, for your presentation. If I was asked what my next dream house would be like, I would also ask for a pool, I think.
Of course.
And the glass house and whatever fancy I can't afford. That's what dream houses are about, I think.
Yeah.
But it's, we have time for some questions and then we'll take a break. Yeah.
Not so much a question as to a comment that also in Curaçao you have a long tradition of what you called flow building in the sense of what on the island is known as Kastang di Kaha, these box houses, that is one box, and gradually added the second or third quarter to it. And
Right.
it stems of all the way from the thatched roof types to the later made of aluminium or zinc rooftops. Thank you.
Right. Thank you for the comment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aga. Very interesting presentation. I'm wondering whether you also see cement as a key of material in the construction of the modern concrete housing in response to climate change. I'm asking this because cement in your picture also seems to be everywhere. For instance, like another case in the world, like Chinese cement companies often use predatory pricing outcompete other producers. So my question is that, do you see cement as a part of the modern housing trend that is overtaking traditional wooden houses alongside the glass houses that you presented earlier? Thank you.
Right. Thank you for your question. I do not think that building with cement is necessarily the best solution for building on the island. Right. It's present at all of the islands. It's a very predominant way of building because it also implies lesser maintenance efforts, right? Because wood still has issues of termites, it needs to be more preserved and taken care of, whereas the concrete does not have this short-term maintenance requirements. However, concrete houses do not perform well, they overheat, right? So especially if it's a relatively, not so high and a small space, it starts to behave as an oven. And that is not sustainable in the way because firstly, it consumes a lot of materials to actually produce concrete. Secondly, it heavily relies on the air conditioning, which also consumes a lot of energy and generates a lot of costs for the residents. But from this research, what we concluded with is that there is not a single perfect house solution. You know, it comes from a different elements that can be connected together, and it's up to an individual to make an informed decisions to which design choices they're going to opt for, knowing the implications that this design decision has.
Thank you. There was another question from this lady here. Yeah, the mic is coming.
Hi. Hello. I have a question because I saw recently on social media in Ghana, they have air conditioning is built into clay walls in spiral carved vents that swirl wind and cools the room without any fans.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was very interesting, knowing our weather here, and I took a picture right away of it. And that way, I also dream about all kind of self-sustainable off-grid way of living on the island, as an islander myself. But I have a problem. Recently I've learned that like 50% of all the houses, all the properties on the sea is owned by non-locals. And besides that, I was like interested in this project, and then I noticed that all the prices went up within months, and then they were complaining that no islanders were able to apply for these houses, so resulting for a social project resulted in just another project for foreign investors who don't come to live here. They basically buy the house, turn it into a B&B, and they don't live here. So it's a two-component question. Creativity, how far can we go in integrating old methods? And how do you keep it affordable and accessible for people who have no opportunity to get like a higher pay to invest in their own housing, let alone if they have property to older people cannot maintain their houses?
Right. Yeah, thank you for your question. From the one side of the climate adaptive architecture, as we usually refer to those elements that are specifically designed and integrated in the housing to control the temperature without being dependent on the air conditioning system. There is indeed a lot of this local or vernacular knowledge on all of the places, including even the Caribbean itself. So the shuttle houses had this system to be adapted for the houses, right? They embrace the wind. They try to make the air flow through the house, keeping it cool, rather than retaining the heat how the concrete houses do, right? So there is also many modern projects that are little by little implementing those climate aspects. In our housing design tool, we also implemented some of the elements that could actually improve the climate of the houses, to also have an overview what are the options that can be implemented. And that was also based on the interviews that we have with the architects who are actually focusing on designing such homes. And it's actually incredible because nowadays we can design, if we think about position on the site, if we think about shading, if we think about wind, we can design houses that do not require an air condition or require in a very minimal amount if we want to keep the room degree temperature at 16 degrees, right? So that is very much possible, but still needs to be further embraced and implemented on the island.
Yeah, and I think the economic affordability question, that is that something that you would like to? Okay. Well, I think that is a highly interesting topic. That Corina, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I actually had a question for Aga.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, I think I definitely see similarities to Curaçao, also in terms of the adaptability that the participators show. I was wondering if you explored also how that relates then from an urban planning policy and in terms of building regulations, if there's room to accommodate that and how, and if that's even desired.
Okay, so we have two questions, right? So should we first do, yeah?
Still the other one, yeah.
Okay.
And then perhaps Kerstin, you can ask your question to Melanie, and then we'll see if we can wrap up some answers.
Yeah.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Aga, for this very interesting presentation. I thought the last question I was going to ask about, I'm a structuralist and a materialist. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, I mean, the last two presentations, I'm thinking, this is all on the micro level, on individual based on existing relations of power. How do we get to the issue of spatial and housing justice and actually, changing the existing relations so that people can have access to space, have access to life and community that's not based only on individual use of space, but based on a sort of collective and change in the unequal relationships of housing and access to housing.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. It was really fascinating. And I had a very quick comment and then a question. The comment was just about the chattel house, which is actually a post-slavery architectural, so it's a post-emancipation architectural innovation to respond to landlessness. So I totally agree with you about the idea that these houses could be moved, but there's not a lot of, I think, evidence of them in the period of slavery itself. They are an innovation of free people in response to post-slavery sort of socioeconomic inequality and exploitation. So one of the question that I had is similar to Keston's question, but slightly different in the sense that I was so struck by the images that people drew and the fact that they did show outdoor spaces. And I wondered if there was any sense that, like, first of all, did you see differences of gender, of age, in terms of what people dreamed of? But also, when it came to outdoor space, was there any sense, were they talking about these as I want my own individual pool? Or was there a sense that, well, I would like, are there a sense that these are things that should be created by, say, government authority, or there should be structures in place to support people in having these for their as community spaces. Like, was there an articulation? Did people have an articulation that suggested housing as a kind of just an individual responsibility?
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, that's my.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. So Aga, did you still follow up on all the questions? I think there were some of.
Yeah, let's see. Okay, so firstly, about the individual versus collective, right? So we always organize the design activity in groups, right? So it was 3, 4, 5 people working together. We often try to mix between students, residents, architectural designers, depending on what particular setup and attendance allows for. So the swimming pool was actually imagined as a collective space of joy. So it had also this reading of being a space where people can meet, they can talk, they can enjoy, right? So it was not only about the basic fact of having a pool, but rather what it implies, at least in the imaginary way. But yet there is still, at least on San Martin, because this is where I built most of my research, there is a strong preference of detached private houses over collective, more high-rise solutions, right? So there is still this individualization, and you also see it through how people separate their plots and try to, gain as much as possible privacy within a very, close setup, let's say. Yeah, so that would be this one. Then we go to Kinston. So your question was about housing inequality, right? So indeed, it's a very complex systemic issue that the work of singular PhD researcher cannot fully address, right? We also have the support of the policymaking advisors in that. However, what we tried to do was to open the conversations between the government officials, between the affordable housing agency in San Martin, and between the residents, right? Because how the social houses are right now developed, it's in a very disconnected way for the residents and their specific needs, right? So the houses are just place them based on standardized layouts and ways of designing, right? And even during the conversations that we have had on Friday, we found out that to some extent there is conversation, but it only reaches the level of consultation, So there is not the actual co-creation and engagement and engaging with different type of knowledges to actually together come to the design solution, right? So this is what we propose through this process to address this lack or very limited collaborations through this design tool.
I think there's a lot more to say on this. We have the panel discussion also with people working in the local economy also and being challenged by it, but also trying to make a change there, however challenging that is from different roles. So I suggest that we also, the housing affordability issue, that we move that on also to the panel discussion, and we can expand a bit more on that. We're late for the break. We're desperate in need of coffee, or at least I am. See you back in 15 minutes, and then we're gonna dive into the botanical memory, the vegetation memory of Bonaire. See you soon.
welcome everybody. Good morning, bon dia. Also, bon dia, good afternoon to everybody online watching. Well, I will show you what I've done over the couple of about 4 years now. My name is Kees Noora. I'm a biologist and also a paleoecologist, and I've been working with many people, so quite a large list people that contributed to this research. And we're still preparing the paper, so be careful with the data I'm presenting. So our preliminary, so be careful not using it. Well, you saw this image of course yesterday already a few times. The climate system in the Caribbean is very complex. It's also very hard to predict climate in the future. And therefore you also need, well, how was the climate in the past? Can we learn from the climate in the past? Also to predict what will happen in the future. So we have, of course, some historical data. I think for Curaçao, we have almost a 200-year record of precipitation. I think that's quite unique. And if you put it in a graph, you see a large variability in rainfall, annual rainfall, with very dry years. We have, fortunately, some years are missing, but you see a trend, a small trend, a kind of drying trend. That's the black dashed line. So the red one is the long-term average. So you see a small decline in precipitation. So that's the 200-year record. But we would like to look before this period. And of course, sometimes Curaçao also get stuck. Get a hurricane. I think the last big one was in 1877. If I'm right, looking at you, I think that was the last biggest one. I think.
1932 had a big one.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it also happens on Curaçao. About the vegetation, we have a few records of past vegetation. There are some botanists that came to the islands describing the vegetation. We have old photos, so we get a little bit an impression of the vegetation in the past. But we really want to know, well, further back in time, how did the island look like 500 years ago, for example. And also what we would like to know, what was the influence of the humans. How did they manage the landscape? How did they influence the vegetation? And so, to look in the past, well, we need archaeologists like Jay, looking at here at the excavation at Slagbaai. To support this archaeological research, you can also look into the water. Because there's also an archive in the water, and that's what my talk will be about. So we'll bring you into the water, into taking the mud from the bottom of the lakes. Well, the archaeological research is a kind of timeline, just a broad timeline to have an indication about which period we are talking about. So we have the hunter-gatherers on Bonaire till about 450 AD or CE. And then you have the ceramic people that use also agriculture. And then we have, of course, the post-Columbian era. So these are the dates you should keep a little bit in mind. So 450, now 1500 everybody knows, of course. Well, so let's look at these salinas or lagoons. So there is a hidden archive on the bottom of these lakes. And that are what we call sediment, it's just mud. But in this mud, you have also microfossils. And you can't see them with your eye, but if you look under the microscope, you can identify pollen from plants. You can identify diatoms from this algae, little algae. And you can also see charcoal particles from past fires. So that are the proxies we are looking at. So every plant, yeah, we're talking about epoxies, every plant produces its own type of pollen. So if you find this kind of pollen, you know, oh, this palm tree was standing there maybe a few hundred years ago. So these pollen can survive for thousands or even millions of years. So well, pollen are, you have different type of pollen for the pollination between the plants. And you have insect-pollinated plants. They don't produce that much pollen. Well, you have the bed-pollinated, like some cacti. They produce much more. And you have wind-pollinated plants, like grasses and like maize. That's also a kind of grass. So those plants produce a lot of pollen. And they are that big, they can even see them on this film. You can even see that they produce a lot of pollen. So these type of pollen you can find in your sediments, but you have more chance to find wind-pollinated pollen than from insect-pollinated plants. There's another wind-pollinated plant that also produces a lot of pollen, but it's very rare at the moment on the islands. Does everybody recognize this plant? It's a herb. You recognize it? Yeah, I even don't know the Papiamentu name of this one. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And where do you see this plant nowadays? Okay. Yeah. Well, it's a small plant, but it produces a lot of pollen. So, so back to the archives. So pollen will tell you something about the vegetation in the past. So if you take a sample from the top of your sediment, it must represent your current vegetation. So if we analyze the microfossils from this top layer, well, you find half of the pollen are from one tree. Paleodyqui in Bonaire. I think, how do you call it in Curaçao? Inju, yeah, okay. So that's also, that's nice to know. Do you think it was already present during indigenous time? Yeah. Well, I don't think so. We'll see if it was present or not. So, but nowadays it's dominating the vegetation. On many, especially on Bonaire, Curaçao as well. Aruba a little bit less. There's another tree dominating on Aruba, the Uliba. I think that's just the different names for on the different islands. So that always makes it a little bit complicated. So in the top layer, you find also some pollen of the Brazil. So it's part of the vegetation still, but because it's insect pollinated, you only find a few. And some trees you just don't find. The kalbas, they produce not that much, and also the Rayaka, it's very difficult to find in your sediments. A beautiful tree that can grow for hundreds of years, so it was always present as part of the vegetation, but really hard to find.
How do you find the pollinators kind of pollen in sediments?
What?
Like the normal pollen you find in the sediments, the ones that the pollinators get distributed, how do you find them?
Yeah, so flowers, they also lose some pollen to falling on the ground, and then with the water, with the runoff, you also get them to your lake, or your yeah. So another interesting microfossil are diatoms. That are very tiny algae living in the water. Also, you can't see them. So you really need a microscope. But this is a sample from Santa Marta, here in Curaçao. So the Santa Marta Bay has a very diverse of diatom species in the water. Still very pristine lagoon in Curaçao. So hopefully we can keep that lagoon prevented for the development on the island. It was a very special place. And this is my favorite item. It's from found it in Sint Maarten. A beautiful one. And the other epoxy is, we call it charcoal. Oh, the diatom. Yeah, it has only a scientific name, because it's a letter. Yeah, it gives a Latin name, but it's. I have to remember it's not coming to my mind at the moment, but. Oh, because the shape and the aesthetics. Yeah, it's just a nice, beautiful item. Yeah. So another epoxy we're talking about is, well, we call it charcoal, but it's more the charred plant fragments. So that are the remnants after burning. So you can look at the macro, we call it macro charcoal, still very small. Meso charcoal in between, and also micro charcoal that you can find in your poller slides. Here you see an image of a grass poller together with a piece of charcoal from grass. So the first year of the research, we went to many different locations on different islands to look for the best place to take sediments from your lagoons and salinas. So together with Antonio, we did visit a lot of sites on Sint Maarten, and also with the students from USM. We did some coring. It was unfortunately very hard to find a good spot on Sint Maarten because of the frequent impact of hurricanes. So the sediment is much disturbed. But we could use also the recent accumulated sediments to have a reconstruction over the last 50 or 100 years. But we couldn't go back for a few or thousands of years. And we had also support from Stinappa and Bonaire, and Emmeke van Dungen is one of the master students that worked on the shorter course. She published her MSc thesis on reconstructing the impact of land use changes on coastal lagoons in the Caribbean. And here you see the beautiful Santa Marta lagoon on Curaçao. And well, what the conclusion is a little bit that a lot of changes in your lagoon is due to activity in your catchment. And well, urbanization of your catchment will decrease the infiltration of your water into your soil. So it will get much more runoff if you have a lot of building environment. And this is just an example from Sint Maarten. So this is how it looked like well, half a century ago. Oh, sorry. So yeah. So and this is the Sint Maarten, you noemt het gat, that drains the catchment. This is the drainage of the catchment to the fresh pond. And well, in the dry season, it's a nice, calm, cabbling water. But if you have a lot of rain, oh, sure, sorry, that was. It's not. It doesn't start. Or does it? No. I don't think it wants to start. I probably have to press something on the slide, but. Oh, that's. Oh yeah. It's the same gut, It's the same gut during large storm. Yeah. So it's it's an incredible difference between. So the lot of areas get flooded downstream. Well, I think that's also more the discussion also in the afternoon when we'll visit Roikatoje. So the importance of managing your catchment and also catching your water and try to prevent this runoff to your ocean. But now I want to focus a little bit on the longer record. So we went to two locations on Bonaire to take a longer sediment core for reconstruction much earlier in time. Okay, yeah. So we did core at Saline Bartol together with Romee van der Kuil, also a master student, now doing her PhD. And with Lieke Schotsman on Slagbaai. Just to show you what we do then after taking the course, they go to the lab. We have to open the course. So just to have an idea what we will do, what we are doing in the lab. And then we take samples to analyze these extract these microfossils. So this is the core we have from Slagbaai. So what we should do is dating the core. So you take radiocarbon samples that you also that you know how old the sediments are. So this is the timeline we can reconstruct from this core. So it goes back almost 2,000 years. And well, we can look at different. So yes, I show you different analysis. You should look at the purple ones. The purple are gypsum precipitates that occur during very dry periods. So you see a lot of gypsum in the period of in the archaic and early ceramic period. So there must have been a very dry period in the past. You see some small peaks in the recent deposits, but much less prominent than in the past. Well, this is the charcoal record. It was also quite surprising. You see, so the indigenous people used fire clearly, yeah. You see a very strong drop after 1500. So you even don't see the signal of the charcoal production in the area. You have the charcoal production, but you don't see it in the signal. You only see the burning during the agricultural period as you can see, a few hundred of years. So it must have been impacted your environment as well. So these are the same image for this micro charcoal, indicating that most of the charcoal is from grasses. It's where these fires where the grasses were set on fire. Probably after the dry season and just before the rainy season. We did find some maize pollen, so the red dots. And you can see it nicely during the agricultural period and one in the more recent period. Yeah. Yeah, it starts, the main peak starts at after 800. So you have to go up. So we read from the bottom to top. So you see the main increase after 800 CE, and then a sudden drop after 1500 CE. And then well, I think because indigenous people didn't live anymore on the island. They were abandoned or so, and the practice. Yeah. Yeah, but it's good. Yeah, but that's a good question. That's why, well, we had some fires before as well. So there was a common practice to use fire It is not so common recently anymore. So for the other pollen, well, you need a microscope. Well, I won't explain it in detail. It's too complex. Many species you can find. But you can see during the agriculture period, the dominance of grasses. We did the same for Selenium batol. It's a very similar pattern. And also did the diatom research on that core. But if we just summarize these complex diagrams, well, I think skip this. So just to summarize. So we put the timeline, what you are used to do, to read from left to right. And so you see a little bit of summary of the different proxies. You see on top the gypsum layers that indicate very dry period. And the zones we identify, the 4 zones we identify, well, they match a little bit with also the archaeological timeline, so it's nice. But our first maize here, the oldest one is around 1,000 years old. So we didn't find older ones. So, but you also don't. You have to be lucky to find some. It's not. But you see the same signal in the Selenium slagbaar as the Selenium batol. So it was not a local signal, but also really a regional signal. And you can also use these data to identify maybe the indew. You can see the green. Was it introduced? Well, it looks like, because you can't find any pollen of the indew before the 1500. And you see also the disappearance of the Mangle Blanco. It was cut for charcoal, so it was a little bit replaced by the indew. And also try to identify like the kalbas. I would like to know if it was introduced by the indigenous people already, when. But it's very hard to find. You can see it. It's the oldest one is also not that old, but that's also doesn't produce much. So you have to be lucky to find it. So you can see that during the ceramic period, it was wetter. So that's also, and that after 1500 you get a gradual drying trend, and also of course more. The impact of humans also play a role in that during that period. But so these are the kind of information you get out of these data. Well, thank you very much. And
thank you so much, Kees. We only have a short time for questions, so we can take 2 questions, and there was some burning questions there. I think, Jay, you keep your questions till over lunch, and we first turn to... Sorry.
I was going to answer the gentleman's
okay.
Just real quickly.
Yeah.
At 1500, you should remember, the Spanish came in and took out a lot of the dye wood. They were exploiting the dye wood in those earliest years, and they had a big impact by taking all that dye wood out.
Yeah.
So I think that addresses some of your question, why.
Okay, a question here?
Not so much a question as to answer his question about charcoal. You have to remember the indigenous people used a lot of slash and burn technique. Yeah, and with, like Jay said, with the coming of the Spaniards, the system of practicing agriculture changed and more using animal-drawn plows and things like that. So that way, and also the sense that most of the indigenous people were removed from the island. So those techniques ceased to exist also in those certain periods of time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then we've got 2 questions. Perhaps one follow-up from you? Yeah? And then we go to you.
Interesting. So that's Um, yeah, that's the disappearance of the charcoal at 1500. That's understandable with the komst van the Spaniards, but beginning of the charcoal there at 1800 CC. Does that indicate that it's was populated then around 800 or? That's the first question, and the second question is. Can you say something about your definition of invasiveness? And what's the difference between nowadays invasive species that we bring, for example, a plum or something from India or Mexico, and it's called invasive, or compared to Native Americans that came here bringing their inju or kalbas, for example? These two.
Okay, thank you. And we take the next question along as well, and then we give the floor to you, Kees, to see how far you get with the answering, or otherwise the audience fills in.
Thank you. I was wondering, the transition from Mango Blanco to Inju, like what were the historical conditions that could have caused it? I know on Barbados, essentially the acacia, I'm not sure, I think the Inju might be a kind of acacia, takes over when soils are like acidic and poor, and that was due to colonial deforestation, like mass deforestation, that allowed the acacia to just then take over, and it tends to form like a mono culture. I don't know if there's like historical reasons.
Okay.
Yeah, well, on Bonaire, the kind of acacia is the wabi, so that's coming a little bit later than the Inju, as you can see on the image. It's dominating a little bit less on Bonaire, completely different from the more poor soils on Aruba. There it completely dominates the landscape, but it invades old agricultural fields. But they are also beneficial because they protect the soil. And like the Inju is very resistant to drought and also saline conditions. So it also benefits. Like your question about invasiveness, some are very also. You shouldn't remove them because we benefit from those plants as well. So you have to keep in mind that those invasive species can be very, it's part of the landscape at the moment, and I think that are also important. So we should promote to cut all those Inju trees. I think then you get a very bare landscape. But of course, you should promote the more the indigenous species that were there in the past, but they grow much slower. That will take time.
Okay, probably some more food for thought. We will have to wrap up now this part. You will be here also over lunch to answer more questions coming on this topic. Thank you so much, Kees, for taking us along in your journey.
Okay, thank you.
And then I would now like to invite the panelists at the table, and perhaps if the people operating the slides can open the slides in the first presentation, and there was one slide that had the panelists on it. That would be helpful. Ja. Ja. Nee, you're free to sit. Ja. 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 Ja, we gaan het weer een beetje inlopen. Okay, thank you so much. It's always a challenge in an academic conference. On the one hand, you want to present your results, and on the other hand, you want to also engage. And especially in this research project that we've been doing, it was not just about producing scientific knowledge for the academic audience, but also to be relevant for islanders and the islands, together with islanders. Well, it's not up to us to judge to what extent we did succeed in this, but we do, keep attempting at it and keep the conversation going. And I'm happy to have here at the table some wonderful people working on Curaçao in different roles on climate adaptation. And the challenges that it brings. So I would, just as an opening, would like to welcome you, to each of you introduce yourselves, and please pass on the mic. And can you in particular briefly state on what climate adaptations have, so what's your name and role, but also what climate adaptation activities are you working on, and what lessons from the past have influence these activities? Do you have a concrete example of that? Is that something to start with? And I'm, Michael Newton.
Okay, fine.
Floor is yours.
Thank you, Ellen. Good morning. My name is Michael Newton. I'm a conservation architect working for quite some decades on Curaçao already. Since some 10 years, I have my own consultancy for heritage management. But also for projects. I work on all these 6 islands of the Dutch Caribbean, and so I have a view of the broad scope of it. I'm an conservation architect, studied in the Netherlands. I was born and raised on Curaçao. So yes, I came back afterwards, like all of you, by the way. That's my introduction. What climate adaptation activities are you working on nowadays? Well, at this moment, especially, I'm working on the Roikatoche project, which you will visit. At least most of you will visit this afternoon. Because I'm also board member of the Roikatoche property. It used to be a plantation from the middle of the 19th century. It was owned by the prosperous, well-known family Maduro, and they stayed owner of the property till the last owner died some 10 years ago, and it was transformed into to a foundation, the whole property, which is a plantation house, some modern houses, but also the Hoffi, as we call it, the Hoffi, the Roikatoche. And I'm a board member, especially responsible for the property itself, for the structures. And when at a certain moment, some 2 years ago, the possibility to restore, to regenerate the Hoffi, which was quite grown over, we got funding from the Netherlands and from Curaçao, and so we stepped in with this project. And what we did, we regenerated, we restored all the dams and the waterways and the, how do you call kunstwerken in Dutch, in English? The civil structures of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. So they were not functioning anymore. Most of the dams were not functioning anymore. So we restored everything. And just since a few months, it's finished. And we had an opportunity to look how it works. Some 2-3 weeks ago, when it started raining very heavily, and we could see if it functioned as we thought it would function. We still do a try and error. I'm doing together with Casper, and it's very interesting to see how it functions. And 2 days ago, Ellen also visited just after a heavy rain fall. So it's an interesting thing. So that's the project I'm doing right now as a as a board member of the foundation. All the thinking of it is done by Casper, but maybe he will explain afterwards.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I am Peitsi Flores Girigori. I'm a civil servant. I've been working 18 years for the government of Curaçao. I've been working first as a meteorologist and chief operations officer at the Met Office. And recently I transitioned to the Ministry of Health, Environment and Nature. So I'm more involved now into implementation projects. What climate adaptation activities I've been recently doing, there are quite a lot, because as a Met Office, we were, of course, very much involved in the part of looking at climate change and how it would affect the island. But then on the adaptation side, I was working first on the water management policy, developing this policy, and now this policy has been ratified by the Council of Ministers, so we move into implementation. And for this, we are looking at a specific project where we are trying to reconnect the old water systems, the dam structures, with new waterways. Because of development in these areas, you see that the old dam structure is not sufficient anymore to cope with all the water that's coming. So we're trying to find a solution for this problem. And another project that I've been working on is the National Adaptation Strategy, and still working on. And in this project, we did make a shift, because before we were looking more at a sectoral approach for the National Adaptation Strategy. And then we decided that we had to move from that sectoral approach to a more systems thinking approach. And the reason that we did this is because when we were looking at the specific sectors, the main adaptation activities that would come up were infrastructural. But then there was this festival in Curaçao, which is called the Kaya Kaya Festival. And I started to look at the festival from a different lens, seeing it as also a climate adaptation project, where they basically were working on social cohesion, and they were working on getting the neighborhood more, that they could come up for themselves, and also restoring the infrastructure within the urban area. And how this works as a climate adaptation project is that, especially if you have extreme events, the neighborhood is the first system that's going to pick up this shock. So if you have a good social cohesion within the neighborhood, this would mean also that they would first take care of themselves, and then government could enter and further help in this aspect. But they were also looking at increasing the livability of the area, so looking at putting in more spaces where you have shadows, and also pocket parks and so forth, and also food forest parks. So with this idea in mind, I thought that we had to move from the sectoral thinking of climate adaptation and look at it more as a system, because then these social solutions also pop up as climate adaptation options. Otherwise, you would still be continuing in the infrastructural segment. And then by looking at systems, it also means that you look broader and further, and not only think how the box works, but also does the box still fit what we're trying to do? So do we need to change this system that we're working into? And the beautiful of it is that because we are a small island and we have limited resources, by looking at it in an integral way, you are identifying adaptation options that are applicable for many different sectors. So in one, we are killing one bird, a lot of birds, literally with one stone. So it's a way of also thinking how we can invest our money more effectively.
Yeah. That's a nice expression for an ecologically concerned lady. Timo.
Nice, thanks. On that note, I'm Timo Kelder. I was also born and raised here, then went to the Netherlands to study, like many of us. And then after my PhD, I started to work at Stichting Climate Adaptation Services, which is a Dutch foundation, non-profit. And from there, we started exploring, can we set up climate impact atlases like we have in the Netherlands, also for Dutch Caribbean islands. But then, yeah, of course, informed by Caribbean logic. So in that sense, you were asking, has Islanders helped in that way? Well, at least for me personally, a lot, through many interactions to better understand and position what can we do. And this climate impact atlas, so that's one of my role, and the other role is helping towards plans and strategies, like with the NAS. But just a little bit more about the atlases, like for Curaçao, climacorsao.com is now online. So it's a website, and I think one first big part of it is how can the local knowledge institutions also share data so that people have it available. So like Armabi, like Meteo, these type of data sources are on there and freely available for everyone. And then also thanks to Islanders at the Helm, we had a session, also thanks to Nam, I see you're present here, to also incorporate what is besides the map, these maps that we have, the knowledge that we already hold, some more in mind maps rather than spatially. And that was given to Tyson Hill, a writer that Paige also champions, and now we have beautiful stories written by a writer that introduce characters and how they are experiencing climate change that are also on the atlas. And like that, for each of the island, there's a different approach taken, very much guided by locally informed process. Like for Antonio, for example, has really been pushing the whole island approach for the Sint Maarten Atlas. So we're very much looking forward to launching that one later this year. So that's a little bit on these initiatives.
Yeah, thank you. Casper.
Hello. Hi everybody, I'm Casper Lendering. I'm a civil engineer by training. I have some former colleagues from Delft here.
Can you
so
speak in the mic?
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, it is, but it's sensitive.
It's sensitive? This better? All right. So I'll hold it a bit closer. So I studied in Delft, civil engineering, specialized in water management. I did a PhD in the Netherlands in flood risk management. Obviously a very Dutch topic, but obviously also now very relevant all over the world. Came back to the Caribbean in 2019 when I moved to St. Maarten first, and started working as an independent consultant by myself, but also working for the World Bank on projects in the area, in the region, on coastal development and coastal protection in Grenada, and on broader watershed management issues in St. Lucia. Then moved back to Curaçao and working here on the Aruba Curaçao project, which we're visiting this afternoon, but also as an engineer working on whenever there's coastal development that needs reviewing or design, I can be involved, and let's say a broader vision on water management and watershed management on island. And that also working with my neighbors here, Patsy and Timo, on the national adaptation strategy for these topics. So very much involved, but I am more a classical engineer approach, so that's different maybe than what Patsy was saying.
Thank you, Corinna.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Corina Regales. I work at Algemeen Pensioenfonds van Curaçao. That's the general pension fund for the civil workers. And I'm part of the real estate investment team. So what we do is everything that has to do with the real estate and urban development investments. My background itself is architecture and urban development, also studied in Delft. And yeah, we have a lot of commercial projects, buildings, but also land, relatively large real estate portfolio for Curaçao. And not just Curaçao, also Bonaire and St. Maarten. So for us, it's especially more from a financial perspective as an investor. So how do you make sure you have stability within your portfolio, retaining the value that you have, but also making sure that you're adding new value because you have a financial obligation to pay the pensions, not only now, but also far ahead in the future. So that is something that we're looking at, climate adaptation also from a risk perspective. So how can you mitigate the risks that come with that? Property is spread all over the island, and what we notice in practice is indeed some areas that when a little rain falls have flooding challenges. So what we're seeing recently is a lot of challenges with the heat and also then the dependence on the air conditioning systems. So, and how this is affecting then also our tenants and their employees. So it has also this spillover effect. So these are the things we're looking into. For us, it's also important then in that sense to look at it broader, not just financially, of course, but also the social side, the physical side as well, and bringing all of that, trying to bring all of that in an equation to make just informed decisions, thinking about the risks with climate adaptation and sustainability.
Yes, thank you. I think this investor perspective, it's rather new at the table in these days. Does now. There have also been some questions already on the political economy, affordability, the capitalist system in which we are operating, and which also influences the real estate market and the risks that come along in Curaçao. Also, the panel discussion is also titled Co-Creative Approaches. So we've been looking, especially till now in this conference and also in the project, especially on, towards bottom-up development, you could say, with citizen involvement, focus on citizens and their needs. So what do you feel that the role of this financial sector is in it, and are you the bad guys, as it might sometimes be perceived, or is it also, how do you see yourself in this role, and perhaps also people working on the NAS, and perhaps Betsy, also from your governmental point of view now, you can also say something about that. But first, Corinne.
Yes, thank you for the question, Alan. Yeah, I think indeed it's that wide approach that you have to try to adopt in every decision you make, because on one hand you want for your clients, can
you put the mic a bit further? It's a difficult mic. No, closer. Sorry.
Better, better now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like it's almost in my mouth, but. Yeah, this is better, I think. So, yeah, you have to look at it from the different perspectives. So I think that's also one of the first things to do is just acknowledge even, okay, what can we do about regarding sustainability, climate? But it's about finding that balance, because on one hand you have that obligation, that commitment, but at the same time, your same clients are asking you about affordability. So, yeah, how do you balance that? It's, I think, also what Aga mentioned today. It's, if possible, of course, you want everything on your wish list for the dream home. But unfortunately, that is not the reality that we are in. So it's about looking to find that balance. I think one step also is being able to have data. So I'm really happy with hearing also these kind of initiatives and tools that can help also make those decision-making processes more informed, but also from a broader perspective. And trying to bring that value also translated to financial economic value as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Betsy?
Yes. If I can talk about the National Adaptation Strategy and co-creation, I think what we are doing there is we are trying to find a better approach in co-creating, because right now it's more of consultation form and not really having the ideas of the people really reflected or in a good way within the system. The way we designed it is that we held a stakeholder session. And in the stakeholder session, we approached people based on the SDGs, how they are divided in the SDGs, the major group and other stakeholders system, so that we would have voices from all over the country and these also specific vulnerable voices, etc. So we were looking at people that are less abled, but also people working specifically in the industry and so forth, and women and youngsters, etc. This workshop was then focused more on what type of actions could these people propose as national adaptation actions. But these actions, since they're coming from the public, they're very concrete. So they're telling you, you need to fix this, you need to put a park in here, and you need to do that. But we're working on a strategy, which is runs from now up to 2050. So then we are trying to find this way how we can use the information that we did receive from the public, but structure it in a sense that it fits in a strategy, but still people recognize themselves in this strategy. So it has been a friction, but the workshop is not the only thing that is feeding the national adaptation strategy. We did a lot of nulmeting, so benchmarking, to see where we were at this point with all our legislation, our policy documents, and how those could be used within the time frame that we are working in. And based on that, we already had a lot of options and actions available also. And then it's going to be this end of this week, right? Or next week? Next week, we are also going to roll out a survey where during the workshops, the people prioritized which of the specific actions that were mentioned they think is most important. So those actions we are again posing to the general public, people coming to buy food at the supermarkets, we are holding these interviews, and then that information will also be used in the national adaptation strategy. But there is again a third pillar, which is the adaptation database, which has been collecting all the type of adaptation that is coming from research and coming from a broad spectrum of papers, and that is being constructed by the universities, where we also see what worked, what type of adaptation options worked for islands. So at the end of the day, my colleagues here, the three of us, are tasked with the big effort of merging all this information together and try and find what are the main adaptation options that we're taking. And a similar approach was done in Aruba, but because we used the systems thinking and linking all the different policy teams, so we're looking at economy, we're looking at social and laboral aspects of things, we're looking at nature, at coast, etc. At the end, during the first harvesting, we concluded with around 300 actions and options. So in that sense, it wasn't still then necessary to really try and find we say in Dutch, the rode draad, the main lines or the main strategies out of these specific actions. Yeah. And then at the end, we hope that we do have this adaptation database that we can then use as deployable implementation plans every 5 years, so that people can, again, see themselves in the trajectory. But it's trial and error work. Mm-hmm. As we go along, we try to invent how it much better fits what we want to achieve, because it's also a new way of working and thinking for us, because we are used to look at climate risk. This is the climate risk, and so it affects the sector, and then we're going to do adaptation options to fix that problem, that risk that we're seeing.
The
so
solutionism that was referred to yesterday in one of the debates.
Yes, so we're really focused on how to solve things. But now you are looking at it from a vision lens. Where do we want to be in 2050? And how climate change is going to disturb that vision? And then what are we going to do to make sure that we still reach that vision?
Yeah. I want to ask a follow-up question to Casper. You're working also on coastal development. So we also heard that, there's a lot of coastal development taking place. So that brings along some frictions already in what you would like to achieve for the island, but also what are the key economic drivers that pushing out perhaps those other also very important factors. How can you tell a bit about that, and how do you deal with this challenge?
Yeah, so I think as a Caribbean island, it's inevitable that we get emotional when we're talking about our coastlines. Our coastlines are very important economic pillars. People visiting our islands come here for sun, beach, sand, and diving, if we have it. Mostly we do. So whenever there's development on the coast, it creates livelihoods for the island on one hand, but then again, it creates it can create or can damage the ecosystem and the coastal ecosystems that we have, right? In that sense, also in Curaçao, but that's also in the same on all other islands. You notice that once plans are being made for work on the coast, that there are certain organizations that can, and permitting is not done correctly, or organizations that start complaining and stuff like that. In my vision for the coast would be, and that's a similar vision that I use not only for the coast but entire watershed management, is that we look at it basically what Patsy is saying also, not responding to a certain development and then creating actions that then guarantee that my coast is affected minimally or other, but looking at it as a more integral approach. If you start, let's say, up in the watershed, whatever comes down my watershed, at the end of the day, can pollute my coast, come into my coast, create issues with my coral reefs, etc. Once we start developing on the coast, we look at ways of mitigating certain effects. So every development on the coast requires an environmental impact assessment. Every development on the coast requires consideration of sea level rise and wave level rise, etc., etc. But then always looking at it from an integral approach, seeing where I can do the minimal damage and where I can create other opportunities if I were to have to develop here or there. If we make it very specific for Curaçao, if we look at our UNESCO World Heritage Sites of Punda and Otobanda, these inevitably need coastal protection. So we're going to face a situation where we're going to do coastal revetment outside of our walls, meaning that in those areas we need to do, let's say, hard measures or whatever, but that doesn't mean that we cannot do our environmental impact assessments and making sure that we either compensate, move, or take measures to not have too much impact. And that would be my vision or my goal. But
okay,
obviously it doesn't always happen that way.
I think that there might be some questions already from the audience. Yeah. Antonio?
Yes. So, as you mentioned, the universities and the knowledge centers are being involved in these national adaptation strategies. So, at the University of St. Maarten, we went from 600 to 300 adaptation options. And from 300 this last week, we had to reduce it all the way down to 60. 60 and 40, so that you have a total of 100 adaptations. It's very tedious work because you're looking at adaptations options that are found from elsewhere around the world, and things that simply do not apply to your small island in that case. Timo, I would like to hear a little bit more, and perhaps you could just explain a little bit more about the content of the maps, why this is important, the engagement with the community, because it was a very important exercise in St. Maarten. And then for Corina, APS. We all have APS. I think I'm on APS all throughout the island. And I'm not sure to what extent APS in St. Maarten are working as well with the question of housing and real estate. I mean, I'm really disturbed about the use of the word real estate and APS. But linking it to Aga's presentation, and I don't know to what extent self-organized house building is as much as, how big is it in comparison to St. Maarten? I have the feeling that in St. Maarten is bigger. And I would like to know, if you're working in real estate and you're working in insurances, what is the relationship? Are you working with self-organized houses? Or are you working with new projects that involve the banks, that involve finance and debt for all? Most of all.
Let's first collect. I saw two other hands raised. Let's first
Yes,
collect the
hello.
questions and then we'll go to the
Hello.
answering.
My question is directed at Timothy and Corina. Being the fact that we have an aging population that at a certain time aspires to move from their current home to a more cozier, smaller, and more adapted to elderly people home. How can we make available that those people at a higher age still have the possibility of financing and has the possibility of getting those houses more adaptable to their needs and the climates that will be within those houses? This is also in correlation with what Aga brought forth with the type of houses that need to be used to get a better home climate instead of depending so much on the air conditioning and bringing about a higher cost of living, while we know that those people that already are in pension usually have a lower income.
Yeah, good question. Thank you very much. And then we have Catherine.
Hi. I got a 3-point question, but they're all very quick. So I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more about this, the sort of kind of engineering of a plantation technology and what the kind of ethics around that space and the consideration of kind of reinforcing that heritage of a kind of colonial technology. And that's kind of related to another question around, we heard yesterday that communal land ownership is a kind of defense against climate change. So what are in the NAPs and the kind of, what are the possibilities of communal land ownership and what are the kind of changes perhaps in fiscal space that need to happen to make that a possibility?
Yeah, thank you so much. So interesting questions. Whom can I give the floor first? Perhaps Corina?
So thank you for the questions. To start off with the first one regarding the self-organizing houses. I think here we see that a lot in Curaçao as well. We, as a pension fund, we don't build at the moment the dwellings ourselves. We have projects in which we sell lot and people can then build their own houses, and that is done according to certain building regulations, the ones that exist, and some projects we have that we add also to maintain the value again for the neighborhood, for the project, to be able to keep the buyers, the residents, the community happy. So I think also in terms of, I spoke to Aga about it after, I think regulation, urban planning policies can really help in that regard to give room for these kind of developments, if that's what we think can really help certain communities or to close a certain housing demand gap. So those are things that I think are important because we do see that people are adapting their houses as well. But then, you need to be able, I think, to fall back on regulation as well. So I think that plays an important role. For the other question...
Would such regulation allow APC also to play a more prominent role or to be more meaningful for the clients?
So that it's on a national level. So that the regulations regarding the dwellings, what is possible, needs to start and that it's on a national level as well. Okay. Because I think then also you're able to, you create then a field in which developers play by the same rules. So I think that's also important. For the other question regarding the senior living housing, that's something indeed in Curaçao too. We see the ages are going up and there's definitely a rising demand for that, but also in terms of affordable senior housing. So that's also something we're looking into, especially in areas where we have large lands to make on that urban scale master plan level to see then how you can bring those in balance. So by maybe developing one part for touristic or more commercial projects and therefore having space for more affordable residential options. Because like I said also before, you do need to make a certain financial feasibility. That's important. What we are also doing in terms of affordability, and not specifically though for senior housing, but one project we've done recently, which we noted it seemed to work quite well, is that we limited only one person to buy one plot in that project. So limiting investors or speculators to buy multiple lots and therefore using it for commercial purposes instead of focusing on the residential effect.
Yeah. And is there already some, I know that in the European Netherlands territory, there is some tourist towns, they already zoned some areas that it's not allowed for non-inhabitants of that municipality to buy there. Would that be an option in Curaçao?
Yeah, I think that's something we are facing already. But again, there are regulations and also applying that. So making sure to do the controlling and making sure people are keeping up to that is very important. We are seeing cases indeed with, it falls also with regulations, rights of property, because are you able to tell someone what they can or cannot do with their own property? So it's connected to all of this, but I do think what we try at least is to see where can you make certain areas within certain projects more destined for touristic purposes perhaps, and others more for residential, because you want to keep also that quality of life for the people who do live there permanently. You want to try to maintain that for them.
Thank you. I would like to move to Michael on the restoration of colonial infrastructure. Can you respond to that?
Yes, well, probably you were mentioning, or you're referring to the Roy Katoche Hoffi, where we're going this afternoon. Well, you had maybe some 100 plantations on the island, scattered over the island. So you had some 100 plantation houses with all the facilities around it. I think at this moment you only have some 20 real plantation houses where you can see that it's part of the former plantation. You have more plantation houses, but they are completely surrounded by urbanization. And you see that's the old house, but it's you don't see the plantation anymore. But besides the plantation the land house itself, the plantation house, as I said, you had those other buildings, but you also had areas where you wanted to catch the water, and it was done by the dams. Yep, you have water systems of rainwater coming from one side. You want to stop the rainwater from flowing into the sea, and that's where you build your dams, and that is also what Patsy was mentioning. But in Roy Katoche, they did it, and they have structures that at a certain moment, the first part where the water comes in, you block it. The water cannot go through. The intention is that the water get absorbed in the soil, and when it's absorbed, you can go to the second area of this.
If I may interrupt you, Michael, perhaps the underlying question is, well, do we want to restore such infrastructure, and for whose benefit is that?
Well, this project was done, they call it the Erfgoed deal in the Netherlands, to restore historic structures, but making it function again. So that's what we're doing now. We restore it so that it's going to function again, and that's the water quality of the soil gets better.
Perhaps,
that's the
Casper,
that's the
you can
intention.
add something to the present value. Or,
I think mainly, just shortly, I think one of the things what she raises also about ethical, if it's an ethical question, if we're restoring colonial structures and colonial heritage and stuff like that. I think obviously this is always going to be an emotional discussion, but with
okay. Okay, but perhaps to what extent is the current water I mean, we do have water management issues on the island. So to what extent is it serving, the future water management opportunities?
Let me then not go into that part and just talk about water management. So these water management structure, I mean, the water management structures that were built and restored here. They are restored as a function because we live on a very dry island, a semi-arid climate. We do not have so much rainfall on the island. And our first inhabitants, not only from colonial time, but also pre-colonial time, already built dams, arroyo, and stuff on island to make sure that they have drinking water. Nowadays, we drink seawater from reverse osmosis plants, meaning that we're not as much dependent anymore on rainfall as we used to be on the island. That does not mean that we still need our groundwater replenished, and areas where we can do that are areas where historically dams and arroyo and such were built, which is why if we restore them and make sure that these function already like they used to be, we're not as much dependent anymore on our reverse osmosis. Maybe we can use groundwater for other purposes and agriculture purposes as was done before. It's important for us to restore.
Betsy?
I'm sorry, and if I may add to that, there is also this component of the marine ecosystem and nature, because these dams were built in the natural watershed system. So they would look at how the water would naturally flow and then build these dams so that the water would infiltrate into the ground so that they would have water. And at the end, back in the days, you would also have what we call the waterplantages. And because the island was so dry, these were the areas that were producing water, or they were subtracting water for the population to be able to use. But then there is this marine component to it, that if these structures are not working well, all this sedimentation is coming down into the marine, into the coral reefs, and then you have a lot of algal blooms, and they are basically suffocating the corals. So it's not only from a perspective of that we need water on land, but it's also from a perspective that we as an island would definitely want to conserve our coral reefs and try and give them as much as possible, what we say, a goede uitgangspositie, in the sense that if they get hit, if there is coral bleaching or whatever, they can easily or more easily start growing again and start adapting again. So there's also that component towards restoring these systems.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think, Timo, with the Climate Impact Atlas and with some of the solutions, you aim to give such an integrated overview and the interconnectedness of different interventions on different system levels. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. But we don't know how to dive deeply into the legacy of colonial structures and shifting power dynamics. So it's on the climate system level. So it would be, we would be very keen to better understand how we could integrate that in a better way in the atlas. But nonetheless, the maps now, as Antonio was asking, are showing what are, for example, the impact from flooding, from rainfall on the island, and which regions have most impacts from flooding. And on St. Maarten, there was a lot of emphasis being done, because maps can also have quite a important narrative that for St. Maarten, often the Dutch side is portrayed apart from the northern French side. So there was a lot of emphasis on how can we collect maps from both ends of the island to at least be inclusive of the whole island approach, and then these maps were discussed with people from the disaster risk reduction departments and the public by USM to also discuss what can they use these maps for and how can they help this also for their own planning.
Yeah, thank you. Michael, you wanted to add something.
I don't know if all the questions are answered.
Well, I think we don't get to that in this hour.
Because, yes, I want to focus on 1 minute at the title of this discussion, the climate adaptation in the past, present, and future. Talking about restoration, it's a very sustainable business. Yeah, because you're restoring a building which was built maybe 200, 300 years. You're reusing a construction from the past for the future. In the past, what they did with the building to make it livable, they tried to keep the sun out. They tried to keep the wind in for the ventilation, and they tried to collect water on the roofs for drinking water. So those were the 3 topics which were for the climate use, climate adaptation from the past. What happened? Well, the first thing, the water, we didn't need it anymore, so it wasn't collected on the roofs anymore. Like Casper was saying, it goes to the sea and it's pumped up again a few kilometers to the south, to the west, to make via osmosis make fresh water. So that is not done anymore. They keep the wind in. They're closing it up because they think it's air conditioned. It's nicer. And also to keep the sun out, it's almost not done anymore. And what we see at this moment, we talked about new constructions we are being built by local and foreign investors. And you see them all around them. And maybe I can mention one of the 3 buildings near the St. Anna Bay. The architect is not here, so maybe you invested in.
Keep your eyes closed.
Yeah, keep your eyes. These are 3 towers near the sea, near the entrance of the harbor. Very nice view. But if you look at the climate adaptation, it's a mess. There's no ventilation anymore through the building. It's not thought about. It's not only this building. You see it all over the island. They don't look at the wind coming into anymore. They think, well, we'll use the air conditioning. The second thing is water collecting. That's not important anymore because we have the water from the faucet. And the sun. If you look at these apartments, by the way, but you see it everywhere. After 3 o'clock, the sun comes in because on the glass part. You talked about the glass houses. The glass part has the nice view, so you want to have a lot of glass. But at 3 o'clock, the sun comes in. You don't have any protection against the sun. So I don't know how those people live. They cannot sit on the balconies, which they have. At least after 7, they can sit on the balconies, but before that, it's too hot. So it's not thought about, and I don't know what happened with these architects because I just finished a study about the architecture, the modern architecture, which you mentioned, the glass houses, from the 1930s till the 1960s on Curaçao, and those architects, although they were building modern architecture, the new architecture from which was introduced in the first half of the 20th century, they adapted that modern architecture, which came from Europe, to the local situation, and with modern architecture, where the wind comes in, the sun is shaded at the hot times, and it stopped in the 1960s and the 1970s. I don't know what happened. Yeah. Okay. So that's very strange.
Yeah.
By the way, I published a book about it. Still for sale.
Thank you. For the commercial break, that one. Anna, you had a burning question.
Yeah. Now I have a slight comment I want to make before I ask my question. How shall I phrase that? I think, speaking of adaptations, right, I think that another panel which maybe we organize in the future would be about how colonial technologies are adapted in order to, again, manage land and people in new, novel ways, which is why often climate change, or at least the discussion and the discourse around climate change, the people who do it, the institutions who fund it, the IMF that is involved in it, seem to kind of reproduce certain technologies that often end up in people locally then, refusing this talk. And I think this plantation was a great example here on this island to kind of bring that back home. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it at that. My actual question is to Corina and the pension funds. And I met the pension funds on Saba. Very interesting. So I'm just wondering now, when you're talking about this, the country, Germany, that I come from, it was very novel to me to know that a pension fund would actually buy real estate and land. And I think in total, I did the research a little bit last year, but so some time ago, but I think it's around 20% that the Dutch pension fund gets from real estate and land that is being rented out, usually in a very neoliberal manner, where you buy the house, the property, and then you rent it out full on, like everything needs to be taken care of by the actual then tenant, whether that's hotels or land, or as far as I understood. So now from on Curaçao, I'm really interested, where does the money go to? So does it go back to the pension funds in the Netherlands, which is usually how it happens on Saba, for instance, right? Because it's still Dutch territory. How does that work here, actually? Is this just pension funds for Curaçao, or is it just, or does it go to the metropole?
Then Corina answer, and then we have one final question coming up. I think 2 final questions, but first, let's hear your answer.
Yeah, good question. It is different. It's a separate pension fund for Curaçao. And it is different. It's set by regulations coming from the central bank of Curaçao and St. Maarten, where we have to, as a pension fund, invest locally 60%. So that is kind of something to keep also investments in the local economy. Because if we also go, like most Dutch pension funds do, more investing in international projects, it limits capital flowing back in the local economy, which is very much needed as well. So it's a way to stimulate the economy, which brings you in a unique position compared to other pension funds across the world, because you're therefore much closer to actually making that direct impact in terms of buildings and projects that you do. You're much more visible, the reputation factor, all of that is much more closer, because if you invest abroad, nobody knows, or at least it's much further away from the people. So you have here that connection, the close ties, that you have to think, okay, on one hand, it needs to be economically feasible for the financial business case, but also you have a role to play because you're investing directly in the local economy. So you're creating jobs, but you want to contribute that the living environments that you're building, that they also help your same clients. And we're talking, in the case of Curaçao, it's like 20,000 participants we have in the pension funds. That's quite a large group compared to the population size of the island. So yeah, the societal role, I think, then therefore plays also an important role in the decisions that you make. A private, yeah, that's private. So this is everyone working for the government or is affiliated to government organizations.
Thank you. We're going to go to the final 2 questions. Oh, Keston.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's afternoon? Yes, it is. I surprise myself by being surprised sometimes, because I think the sort of mention of the sort of plantation restoration project was sort of skirted over without, it seemed to me, without a self-awareness of what that means. And there was a lot of technical commentary on what it's meant to do, how we're going to do it, why, and no consideration of sort of long historical context of why these plantations were here. First of all, I'm not sure the panel discussion is meant to talk about co-creative approaches, I'm not, to what extent has the community or Curaçaoans or whoever that belong to this island have been involved in articulating different visions of what restoration and heritage might look like? That's my question. But it's also to point out that I'm not sure if it's and I'm going to talk a bit about this tomorrow. There's a sort of European mindset, and I think Paul Gilroy says it really well, a sort of post-colonial melancholia about the fact that these, and the word emotional was used as well, without any consideration of that very long history and what the significance of that was. But beyond that, what does it mean for the present as an island that is deeply and heavily dependent on tourism, and for tourists, and mostly white tourists from Europe, coming to this place and probably going to be visiting these heritage sites? So it's another form of accumulation. It's another form of making some sort of profit or money from a historical system that has brutalized, maimed, killed thousands of people, right? And beyond that, we are still living today with the legacies of that system. So I think there needs to be a little bit more self-awareness. And I can offer, I've written about this, I can offer readings, I could offer material so that people can become more aware of what the plantation system means today and how it is actually living system today.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. We haven't heard the history of how this project has come about.
Could I please ask my dear colleague Nifa to explain the other side of Aruba Curaçao and what they in their organization did in the project? Thank you.
Short and yeah. I think the question raised is a proper question about ethical considerations. Like Casper said, it is important, however, to look at the project from the complete context of the project. The project is based upon investigation, archaeological investigation about how the first inhabitants made use of water. The second research we did within the project is an anthropological research about water management and how the old practices still are present within the usage of water nowadays, and how this has or doesn't have an impact within policy. Besides that, we did restorations for the infrastructure at Ofiroikatochi, and also at Karmabi, the whole area, certain areas in Karmabi as well. The context of the project is not to put attention on the plantation house. I think the intention of Michael in explaining the part of the plantation house was to present the surroundings of where this project took place. As part of the, I'm looking at the director right now. As part of the whole concept, this has been taken into consideration because all the parties involved are taking into the consideration the fact that a lot of times there is more attention put on the restoration of the land houses and not on the infrastructure that has been part of the society that we are now and build. The other thing we did within the project is have conversations with the public about, this project has a theme song that is a work song from enslaved people that they were using to do practices about creating wells and stuff like that. So a lot of thought has been gone into looking at it from different perspectives. We will be having, I'm looking at Francia, we will be having a conference on the 6th of November. So you are all invited to follow either online or present. so we can delve more into the prospect. And it is a fact that Curaçao has to pay more attention when we talk about restoration, when we talk about plantation houses, what's the impact, what the long-term impact, and how we make a divide within erfgoed, what we do categorize as monuments or not. So it is a thing that we are discussing within the erfgoed community on Curaçao.
Thank you. This also calls for an applause, I think, even though not by everyone. Charissa.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a question about co-creative approaches. The way that has been described today, it feels and sounds like rather extractive, to be honest. And I'm wondering about inclusion and what that inclusion looks like in co-creative approaches. I'm also wondering about method and methodology, in the sense of sometimes the methods, the same old methods that we're using are just keeping injustice intact. And I wonder how we are trying to creatively, disturb some of the methods that we're using. Focus groups, surveys, where people are saying that they have survey fatigue, yet we continue to use those methods. And I'm seeing it in the Dutch Caribbean and in research in the Dutch Caribbean continuously, without there being a critical analysis of methodology, and when we say co-creative, what do we mean by that? Because yes, we can ask people questions, and yes, they will give us answers. However, how are they being also incorporated and approached for, being part of the analysis, being part of the write-up, being part of, the different phases that involves research. So when we talk about co-creative approaches, I just wonder how we are radically disrupting that and reinventing it to create something new.
That's a good question. Do we take the final question immediately along as well? Oh, and the third final question.
I'll just keep it very short because I think a lot more people said it more clear than I could have said it, referring to Cheris and Kenton. But my question is, we just listened to the presentation of Kees Nonen here, and he showed us these graphics on the particles that he found in the sediments in the ground. And we see one of the things that struck with me is the charcoal, right? Now, I'm assuming everybody knows charcoal is also very good in absorbing water. And then we see there's no more charcoal in the soil. And then we start to talk about how dry Curaçao is, Aruba is. Any, link to be made there maybe and go a bit further than 200 years ago? That would be my question.
This was the third final question, and you have the fourth final question then, and then we really need to get to lunch.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted, as someone who's also involved in sort of critical approaches to thinking about heritage and so on, I think, and I'm going to say this as kindly as I can, but I think for some of the scientific methodology, there seems to be a little bit of an assumption that that doesn't have history. And I think it would surprise and possibly horrify people to understand just what kind of role slave owners as scientific thinkers played in the development of some of those methodologies. They do in fact have a history, and a lot of that history is about emptying out the social content so that those methodologies can be deployed without any critical engagement with slavery, with genocidal violence. So, I'm sorry, I'm really terrible. Did you hear what I said, or not at all? Okay. Is this better? Okay, so I really think it's important to recognize that, when people are raising these kinds of questions and saying, well, there are these social considerations here, That's not emotional. That's actually a much more critical and holistic approach, in fact, then it actually speaks back against precisely the kinds of the historical development of some of these scientific practices that are about reducing those kinds of critiques to emotion, when in fact they are about politics, they're about economics, they're about human survival. So I guess the question I have is about some of the projects, I guess, even with the engineering projects and so on, that were being described. I'm hearing a lot about the concerns about environmental sustainability and so on, but where is the connection to, like, who is living in these houses, who can afford them? You know, what, again, I'm curious about the co-creative approach. Not, well, the plantation house, that's a longer conversation that we don't have time. But some of the projects that are described here, like you're talking about the watershed, the concerns about the watershed, that's all fine. But, you know, is there any kind of wider understanding of the relationship between the scientific methodologies about that management, that sort of land management and land use and water runoff and all of that, but then the social impacts of what is then ultimately created? Like, because you talked about these projects create, you know, jobs for people, but are there projects that are going to be places where people might, like local people might be living as opposed to working to serve? So it does sound a little bit like it is, again, reproducing a plantation economy, but in new forms. So I would really encourage people maybe to read, you know, George Beckford, here's a suggestion. Lloyd Best, that there are people who do write about this. So maybe thinking about the interdisciplinarity, the disciplinary skill required for some of these projects in a way that actually doesn't reproduce, and again, saying this, meaning this kindly, the sort of emptied out social content that was what planters intended, because that is what they intended. Right?
Thank you so much. We go to the final
Last
question, and then we have a final round of some reflections by each of you, if you feel like it.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question about the co-creation, because I think that's what we were going to talk about. And I have the sense that co-creation can be a vertical metaphor and it can be a horizontal metaphor. What I heard today was verticality. When co-creation is tied to signification, to it's for everyone, it becomes vertical. Then people enter because they can speak along, but it's never for them. That's why you get, after a while, non-participation. The moment co-creation is tied to signification. When co-creation is tied to indication, to a specific thing, then it becomes horizontal. And I have the sense, and that's why the third is always manifestation. Who is speaking? I salute that this is a full Curaçaoan table. But what I hear is co-creation that is vertical. I do not hear the horizontal like I heard yesterday from Patsy, but this one is completely vertical. And I'd like you to respond to that.
Thank you. Okay, so lots of questions, comments, questions for critical approaches. I think what I remind the lady who was doing the ABBA poetry project yesterday, she said we also have to start with what we have. And I think that is what you, in your different roles on this island, are trying. And it's difficult, and we see that also in this discussion. It's difficult, but they're trying, and we need to act. There is an urgency to act as well. So from your attempts, what are your takeaways from this discussion, and what do you like to give back to the audience?
If you allow me, Ellen, I want to address the two questions about co-creation. We have tried and erred a lot. I'm going to start with that, because this is not the first time that we have been attempting at co-creating. Our first attempt was the water management plan itself, and that started in 2016. And indeed, we did use a more European glasses at it, And when the plan was finished, we did a lot of workshops and had a lot of input from people. And then when we developed this plan, we thought it was a great idea to put it on a website and have a broader audience comment on it. And when we look back at that specific action, it was the most stupid thing we've ever done in our lives. Because as Curaçaoans, we are not used to reading these 30 pages of documents. So at the end of the day, again, you received the comments from the people that are used to voice their opinion about these things. So it was a learning curve. When we entered the National Adaptation Strategy, again, it's still, again, a trial and error. When we had the stakeholder sessions, there we saw, for example, that the people that are coming from a migration background, they did not feel safe enough to be part of that workshop. So they really asked us to please come to us and let's talk about this specific topic, but between us as people coming from a migrant background. So we are trying to accommodate that also. The same thing came from the less abled people. And though they were there and participated, they were like, wait, but you guys have to take into consideration, because the person that was there was in a wheelchair. But he said, this is not the only disability that there is. There are others, for example, those that are blind, that are facing the same issues, but then they are not heard in this sense. So again, there we are accommodating again to get the information from them of what they need. I'm not saying it's a perfect system, and I'm really open for recommendations on how to improve our methodology, because as I said, it's a steep learning curve, and we are trying to find our way as we are going, because for us also it's something new. We are trying something because we are used to think in silos, and we are used to solve problems. At least I'm a physicist. The thing I'm used to is I see a problem, how am I going to solve this problem? But the reason I changed that vision is because I was seeing solving this problem was not solving the problem. I realized that it was important to try and understand what was going on around you and trying to understand what language is being spoken around you. And it's not the language of English or the language, but it's really the language of how policy is experienced in our way of living. And so it's been a steep learning curve for us as well. So I'm really open, and I see in this audience we have a lot of other disciplines that are not at the table right now, because we are coming from more of a technical side and more of a in that sense problem-solving side. But you need also the people's perspective, and we're not very good at managing that always. So in that sense, I'm saying I'm not preaching here that our methodology is the best methodology ever. I'm saying it's an evolving methodology, and I'm saying that we're still open for any type of recommendations that could improve this methodology, that at the end, because we're developing a national adaptation strategy, and the horizon is 2050. And one of the main question you would ask yourself, why are you doing this? And when is this going to be successful? And for me, a national adaptation strategy that is successful is not a national adaptation strategy that is scientifically perfectly sound. A national adaptation strategy for me that is successful is a national adaptation strategy that is embraced by Curaçao, that's implemented by the government, that's implemented by NGOs, the civil society, and that's at the end makes sure that the things that we did foresee were going to happen, that they are taken care of. And it doesn't need to be 100%, because we are working right now for 2050, but over 5 years, again, we're going to do an iteration step, and then we're going to make it better. So along the way, we will make it better.
Thank you, Patsy. For the sake of time, a very brief comment by all of you, and then lunch is really waiting for us. Timo.
Well, I think I stand behind Patsy. Not sure what to add. I think more experts are needed here.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to sit here and say that things were not vertically co-creation. I just want to add that in the projects I'm involved with in Grenada and St. Lucia, and those are according to World Bank procedures, they have much more attention for also local communities in their development of their projects.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, the World Bank is, of course, also an institute that is, playing its own role in that. But it's food for thought for over lunch. Corinna.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot there to still do about how we do the co-creative approaches and how to incorporate that also in the design and planning processes. I'd like to just add, I think also, and we try to do that as an investor as well, is start with students, working with education as well, and getting the collaboration of young generations also on how they envision the future for the island. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you. Michael, final few
Final
words?
one, yes, it's
half a minute.
Well, the Curaçao project, as Casper already mentioned, and NIFA explained, it's much broader, it's more horizontal than was explained about its technical part, which we were talking about. And I understand tomorrow Dimitri also will have a presentation about water management in the past. And policy. So another thing I want to add at the end is also that I'm also involved with a restoration project in St. Eustatius. And okay, I'm the technical guy, but we have a complete group of anthropologists and people involving the local people into the project itself. So it's okay, I'm a technical guy, and like Patsy says, well, we're trying to solve a problem, but the things around it...
Sorry, you have to stop.
Yeah, yeah. Thank. I want to give the panel a big hand, but before I do, I still want to emphasize that being here on the island, having a research project like this, it's not just for academia, but also having the conversation with people doing the hard work on the ground. And I think this is what we had during this conversation. It's about listening to each other, conversing with each other, and really learning from and with each other. So I want to thank you all, the panelists in particular, but also the audience for their questions.